This took place at some point in the early 2000s at an elementary school on Long Island. My dad worked and still currently works there as a custodian. And being that my parents split up, I would go to work with him on the days that he had me in the summer, which was a lot since I loved spending time with him any chance that I could. Honestly, I really loved having the whole school to myself. My two older brothers would come in once in a blue moon, but naturally, they drew out of spending too much of their summer at the school and stopped coming altogether, leaving just me. That's when things started getting strange. There were only 3 of us in the building that whole summer. Me, my dad, and his coworker Joey. It's a decent-sized 2-story building with a gymnasium, auditorium, and the other usual elementary school amenities. I would entertain myself the way any kid might do during the day, going into the gym and dumping every ball on the floor from the closet, playing on the computers, reading in the library, and making a mess in the art room. Not to mention the best part of all, unlimited tiny cartons of chocolate milk. I suppose it started subtly from what I recall, like being in the middle of shooting hoops in the gym, and then all of a sudden just feeling like someone was watching me. So much so that I just dropped the ball and left to find my dad. It happened in the computer room too. I was just minding my own business, and then just got this very intense feeling of being watched. It would feel heavy in the room when it would happen, and like the silence became loud, if that makes sense. It creeps me out just remembering that feeling. It started to happen very often, and when it did, I would simply get up from what I was doing and leave to find my dad or his coworker. One day, I had been sitting in that same computer room when it happened again. I decided to tough it out this time, and I stayed put in my seat, probably playing Oregon Trail or something. I felt that intense feeling making me want to leave, but I stayed. And the longer I stayed, the closer it felt like if I turned around, it would be right there behind me. I remember being so tense that my back hurt, and then I heard whispers. They were inaudible, but unmistakably coming from the room that I was in. I felt frozen with fear. I remember the voice of the whispers sounding guttural and chaotic. I don't remember how long I sat in fear just listening to something that felt so strange and unexplainable. I snapped out of it when I heard the sounds of women chattering in the hallway. I was relieved that there were teachers coming up there with me, and I got up without looking back and darted towards the voices in the hallway. I was on the top floor of the building. It's shaped like a rectangle lined with classrooms on the outside, and the center occupied by bathrooms, closets, and a facility room. The voices that I had heard were coming from the other side of the building, and when I rounded the corner to get to where they were coming from, there was no one there. I heard the voices again, but now they were coming from the other side of the building where I had just been. So I went back, and then again, they were coming from the other side of the building. All the while that I was searching for people who weren't there. I had that feeling when you're running up basement stairs and feel like something is right behind you, and it's like ice running up your spine. I finally decided to run down to the first floor and find my dad. When I did, I frantically told him about the teacher's voices upstairs, but not the whispers. I think I was trying to pretend like that didn't happen because it was so scary. It was the first time that I had told him about anything that I had experienced, because I was so sure that there were women talking in the hall upstairs. He explained to me that there were no teachers here, and that they usually came at the end of the summer to set up their classrooms, but it was a bit too early in the summer for that. Also, he said that he would have to buzz them in from the main entrance for them to come into the school. Him and Joey checked every room for me to see if there was someone there, or if there was an open window letting in noise from outside. There was nothing, and no open windows. Just the 3 of us in an empty school. We didn't really talk about it after that. He didn't tell me I was hearing things, and he didn't try to explain it away either. It was just what it was. And although it had been a terrifying experience, I had been coming to that school since I was a baby, and it was easy feeling comfortable alone again, even if it did take a couple of weeks being glued to my dad's side. The last encounter that I had in that school was when I was upstairs alone again, 2 classrooms down from the room that I had heard the whispers in. It was nearing the end of summer and I was given the task of dusting off chairs and desks in all the upstairs classrooms from whatever had built up during the summer. Bent over and dusting a chair, I saw in my peripheral vision someone standing in the doorway. I thought it was Joey because my dad is a bigger guy, and this shape looked tall and slender. He was standing there for a while, so I started talking to what I thought was him, but he just stood there not answering me. When I went to look up, I saw a man, but this was not Joey. It happened so fast because he turned and sprinted out of the room almost the moment that I looked up, but not quickly enough so that I couldn't see his or its face. I really wish I hadn't because it is ingrained in my memory. It was pale and it had a human male face, but it looked off. The eyes were too big and everything about it looked unnatural. It was wearing clothes, but I can't for the life of me describe them. I was too startled by its face. I froze again. I just stood there, afraid to move until finally my body untensed and I ran back downstairs and into the kitchen. I would usually pretend to feel unaffected by spooky things in the school, but this time I ran until I found my dad and Joey in the kitchen. Just for the sake of not sounding ridiculous, I asked if either of them had been upstairs. They hadn't. After I told my dad, they did the whole school check again, reassuring me that no one was there. I remember feeling embarrassed that I had kept coming to them scared. On the ride home that day, my dad had told me that I wasn't crazy, and that there was residue in the school since it was old and always full of people, and when it was empty, it was still so used to moving all the time and having all that energy. He said in his time there, he had heard his name being called and mop buckets rolling down the halls when no one was there but him. He said that he didn't want to tell me at first because he didn't want to scare me. It has been years now since all of that happened, but about 2 years ago from present day, my dad calls me up one night and says, "You'll never believe what one of the teachers told me." He then explained that a teacher claimed to see a well-dressed man standing in back of another teacher's classroom in the middle of a lesson while walking down the hall one day. When she asked the other teacher who the man was later that day, the other teacher was confused and said that there had been no man in her class. It was the same classroom that I had seen the man with the big eyes. I don't know if it was the same man that I saw, and I wouldn't tell my dad this since he was frequently there alone to check the building. But I don't know if I believe that the activity there is simply residue or energy. I think there's something there that went out of its way to scare a child, and I don't think it was friendly. This isn't the first paranormal encounter that I've had, but it is only the second time someone was with me when something strange and inexplicable happened. We moved into the new house that we're currently living in October of last year. I should mention, the house that we came from also had its share of really creepy happenings, and there is one event that I feel is connected to what happened in the new house. I was home alone with my dog, reading on my bed. My parents at the time were remodeling their bathroom, and they had met with a man who would be doing the job at the home improvement store down the block to look at tiles. Now, this whole encounter was quick and over in a matter of seconds, if I'm going to be honest with you. But even now, years later, I struggle to get out with shaky hands on my keyboard. Before I get on with it, I just want to say I was in near silence, meaning no music was playing and no TV. My laptop was off and charging. I was not on my phone, no headphones in. Basically, I wasn't doing anything that would cause a noise. And seeing that I was home alone, the only source of a human voice would have been me. The only sound that could be heard was the sound of the AC. So, I was on my bed reading, my dog was downstairs, presumably napping since he was like 12 years old at the time. He's still kicking and he's 17, and he has a heart condition that causes him to get tired easily. All of a sudden, I hear my mom's voice, greeting the dog like she always does when she comes home. And I mean exactly the way she does, switching between English and Spanish, the same tone, everything. I stood up, stretched, but realized that I hadn't heard the door open, so I approached the stairs. and very confusedly called out to my mom. "Mom?" Silence, and then my dog started screaming. I mean screaming as if he was being tortured. Crying and whining, and I started calling out to him, scared out of my mind. I took the first step of the stairs down and immediately froze. Something felt so very wrong. I was flushed with this fear. I knew without a doubt that whatever greeted my dog was not my mom. Whatever it was, it literally froze me with fear. My dog finally came running up, zoomed right past me into my room, headed into my bathroom and hid behind the toilet. Mind you, through tears and shaky hands, I did call my mom. I practically blew up her phone, but all I got was voicemail. It was the first time that something like that had happened to me, and I knew that I couldn't just explain it off and shelve it to the back of my mind. Later when my mom got home, I told both of my parents what had happened. They brushed it off and thought that I was just imagining things. The second time is actually what I'm writing this post on. It happened in November of last year, but in between moving and settling in, finding a new job, my grandmother's declining health, and how scared my mom was now has been the only time I've gotten to keep calm and tell the story of my second encounter, which what I now refer to as the Mimic. This new house we moved to was built literally a month before we moved in. The neighborhood is still under construction. My mom and I were sitting in the family room giving each other pedicures. My stepfather had gone out with my grandfather to run some errands. We were watching something on Netflix when we both heard my stepdad come in through the front door. My mom called out to him, "Are you okay?" To which we both heard him respond, "Yeah, honey, I'm good." We heard him open the garage door and go in. Obviously, thought nothing of it. 20 minutes pass and we both nearly jump out of our skins when my grandfather opens the backyard door in the family room, peeks his head in and asks if we could open the garage when we had a chance so they could unload the groceries. My mom and I look at each other again, confused as it seems to be an ongoing theme, and then she tells him, "Isn't it open? He just came in." We both look at each other and she starts calling out to him, but my grandfather cuts her off and tells her that it's impossible because my stepdad was out back. We go out to look and there, getting out of his car, it was my stepdad. I looked at my mom to see that she had the same petrified look on her face. My stepdad, still getting out of the car, not looking at us, goes, "Sorry guys, I left the house key by accident. Can you open the garage door so we can unload the groceries?" My mom takes off inside with me trailing behind her, and lo and behold, the lock in the front door was still on, and the garage door was still locked as well. Guys, I can't even explain how terrifying that was for my mom and I. We don't speak of it. That day, my parents fought for hours, my mom thinking that it was my stepdad playing some kind of prank on her, but that clearly was not the case. Later that night when my mom was alone, I approached her and asked her what she thought about what had happened. My mom looked at me very sharply, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Don't ever talk about this again." I didn't think to connect the two experiences until now. Since then, I have not encountered the Mimic. I noticed growing up that while in my early adolescence, late childhood, early prepubescent stage, there was more than often a smell of rotting meat and sulfur that would linger around the house. I would always report and complain to my mom and dad that I would experience these things in and around the house. Now, our home was very clean. My mother and grandmother, who were alive at the time, were always busy scrubbing the kitchen countertops, the floors with that fabuloso smelly detergent and cleaning supply. You know, the one island stores you walk by and your knees get weak because it smells so good. Well, anyway, our home was very clean. Waxed floors, clean windows, always open in the springtime, and grandma liked her sheets hung in the upper wind. I'll point out early on that our home was always tested and run up to code for radon, carbon monoxide, CO2 exposure, and UF emission. All things come back negative and were given a clean bill of health. all the time, which looking back baffled anyone and everyone to question. I never saw these, but literally all of my siblings, my relatives and friends of my siblings, who would spend the night will gladly swear before judge and jury they witnessed these things. No soul mentioned here was mentally ill, abusing substances, or lying for notoriety. Shadow figures. A lot of shadow apparitions, and plenty of visible full-bodied apparitions. They carried with them the ability to manipulate the area around them. Some were identified as male, rarely female. Once, my older sister, was sleeping in an old room before I took over, and before she left for college. She tells this to this day. She wakes up, dead of night, pitch black save for the sliver of light creeping in from the lamppost outside. There's a figure, nondescript, bordering on the edge of the light and leading back into the darkness. She said, its arm was reaching out, hand open and grabbing for me. Spooky, huh? Well, there's more. Another occasion, she gets up and hears footsteps walking down the hall towards the kitchen. She hears the cabinet doors open and close, where we keep the glasses and chinaware. She thinks nothing of it and decides to go get a drink. Upon entering the kitchen, she sees all cabinet doors wide open, and there isn't a member of the family awake. I have heard footsteps and saw a door handle move. Some years back, I come home from school and I want to make a PB&J. So, I'm standing at the counter when from behind me, I hear heavy footsteps slamming up the stairs. My first thought, oh, so we're doing this now. I saw the door handle jiggle, like a hand was grasping around and twisting it. Never opened. I promptly made myself forget about it because despite being the size of a grizzly bear with the attitude of a teddy bear, I get scared of things very easily. Seriously, I've jumped at my own shadow before several times. Back to the story. My younger sister comes home from college. It wasn't that far away she drove to and from, and follows in my footsteps and makes a sandwich. She hears it and sees it. The heavy footsteps, the door handle. She freaks out because she's seen more stuff than I have and is more adept at the hauntings than I was. Backstory, I'm a devout Catholic, have been all my life and I'll die one. My room at the time, and now, looks like a chapel, which there is a reason for. My family has a theory that I wasn't screwed with as much because I was the only one in the house with more than one crucifix in the room. So, my brother comes home from work. We promptly tell him. Being former military and security forces, he gets his .45 and does a sweep of the property. No sign of forced entry. Basement is empty and undefiled by supposed occupying creeps. Hopefully this small novel hasn't lost you, but wait, there's more. My brother has seen things levitate several times. Of course I call BS, who wouldn't? 9 out of 10, there's always a logical explanation for things to occur. Heck, even exorcists are ardent skeptics. Anyway, he has seen his shoe fly across the room. He woke up one night to find his pillow standing stock still. Seriously, standing straight up. He's seen shadow apparitions and has heard his name whispered and called, as have I. It's horrifying when it happens to you. But there's more from him. I'll have to ask and write it down if everybody wants. I witnessed with my own 2 eyes the door to my parents' bedroom swing open and close by itself. Windows closed, no draft and no string. I saw it and it still scared me. I've heard the multitude of whispers in my own home. Seriously, it sounded as if a whole party of people just decided to whisper rock and have it out. My house, well, my whole family is old school Catholic. When I say old school, I mean this. The modern world has lost touch with the idea of the demonic long ago. The world has misinterpreted the signs. The demonic have actually increased, prompting the Vatican to release the Roman ritual of solemn exorcism to Protestant denominations. Think about what I just said. There are certain denominations who don't even have the belief in the diabolic or the rite of exorcism. Old school Catholics have the firm teachings of exorcist light, meaning that all Catholics before Vatican II were basically little non-ordained exorcists running around. If you're curious, look up a Catholic deliverance ministry. They're the grandchild of the olden ways. So, I spoke of this to bring this point home. My sister, older, whom I love absolutely dearly, I would do anything for her in a heartbeat. She's my best friend. But she's an absolute window licker when it comes to this story. She and her window-licking friends used a Ouija board in the basement. Send in the priest. That house has been blessed a total of 5 times. Oh, don't get me wrong. It always was peaceful for long durations, until the activity just reappeared like a bad penny. Here I am, here to haunt. This happened years ago when I was 19. I'm now in my mid-20s. I still remember this very clearly because of how creeped out I was. Back then, I was living 600 miles away from my parents in a different state. Even though there is a distance, my mom and I still talked on the phone at least twice a week, and we were still really close. So, when we found out that her cancer was back, I didn't think twice about dropping everything to drive down to see her. A plane ticket would be too expensive, and I had a 10-year-old Toyota that might have been a bit beat up, but it still got me from A to B cheaply and quietly. My parents weren't thrilled at the idea of me driving the 11 hours by myself, but my mind was made up. So they offered me a deal. I would stop at a rest stop every 2 or 3 hours and stretch my legs and call them, and in exchange for this courtesy, they would pay for my gas. If I didn't call within the 3-hour window though, they would assume I had been in an accident and call me repeatedly, interrupting the audiobook or podcast they knew that I would have on. I accepted the deal. And that's why I was at this particular rest stop at 2:45 a.m. This was actually one of the nicer stops. Well lit, multiple vending machines that didn't have huge cages around them. The payphone wasn't broken, and it looked clean. There were a couple cars there with people sleeping in them. I still had 15 minutes before I had to check in with my parents. I got out of my car and stretched and then almost jumped out of my skin when I heard a man's voice right behind me. "Miss, can I ask you for a favor?" I turned around and he's leaning against my car. I have no idea how he got there so fast. I didn't see him when I parked, but there he was, uncomfortably close to me. He looked like he was in his 40s. He didn't look dirty or twitchy. He was too close, but his body language didn't scream threatening. And even though I was 19 years old, barely over 5 feet and at that point in my life, 110 pounds soaking wet, and even though I had already binged a whole lot of true crime media and knew the dangers of a girl my age alone at night, with an out-of-state license plate, my dumbass asked what he needs. He told me that he accidentally locked his keys and his phone in his truck, and could he just borrow my phone really quick to call his friend? It will just take a second and it would really help him out. And I almost handed him my phone. I was reaching into my pocket to hand it to him, with a Pollyanna, "No problem." And then I actually looked at his face. Like I said, this rest stop was surprisingly well lit, and this guy looked really normal. Except for his eyes. He had dead shark eyes. You know what I'm talking about. It's the Ted Bundy serial killer eyes. They're smiling, but the eyes are vacant and creepy, and staring way too hard. I got that feeling, that runaway feeling. I knew immediately not to hand this guy my only way to call for help. So I put on my best customer service smile and told him, "God, I'm sorry, I don't have a charger, and I need to save all my battery for the tracking that my parents have on my phone. And I need that juice to call my parents, which I actually have to do right now. But good luck." And I turned and walked about 20 feet away. And he doesn't leave. He was still just leaning against my car watching me. And now I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to leave him alone with my car because he creeped me out, and he has the serial killer phase. So going to the bathroom is out. But I also wanted to get away from him, prove that I'm not going to help and maybe they'd leave. I could technically get into the car, but I would have to get really close to him unless I crawled over my passenger side seat, and he's not moving. So I did the first thing that popped to mind. I called my dad, and my dad, for the first time that night, didn't pick up the phone. When I heard his voicemail, I glanced back. The guy still hadn't moved. He's still just staring at me. So I faked a phone conversation with my dad. I angled my body so that the guy couldn't see that I had hung up the phone, and loudly said that I should be home in about 30 minutes, when in reality I was about 4 hours away. I mentioned exactly where I was, and reassured the fake caller that this was a good rest stop, with plenty of lighting and a couple visible security cameras. The guy still hadn't moved, and I'm running out of steam on this fake conversation. In the years since, I've thought of a lot of things I could have said while pretending to talk to my dad, but in that moment, I was beginning to seriously freak out, and my mind went blank. So I hung up, and I didn't know what to do. I had hoped the fake call would have scared him off, but he was still leaning against my car. I stalled for another couple of minutes. I bought cookies from the vending machine. I walked around a little. At this point, he had been leaning against my car staring at me for at least 10 minutes. I honestly debated walking up to one of the men sleeping in their parked cars and asking for help. And just the thought of having to wake someone up to help me get into my own car annoyed me enough that I stopped stalling and I headed back to my car. I decided that unless he touched me, I'm just going to pretend that he isn't there. He waited until I was unlocking my car door before he started talking to me again. He told me again that he really needed to use my phone. He's stranded here unless he can call his friend to bring the spare keys. He's not angry or begging. His voice sounds weirdly friendly, but he had been creepily watching me for way too long while blocking my exit, so I'm not falling for it. I almost pointed out the working payphone, just in case I'm wrong about this and I was being mean to this guy who needed help. But then he leaned forward as I was getting in, and I lost all nerve and slammed and locked the door as fast as possible. He didn't move until I started the car and put it in reverse, and then he finally stepped back and let me pull out. I didn't even have my seatbelt on. I was so focused on getting away from him. And then halfway out of the rest stop, my mom called me. My mom, who would freak out if I don't pick up, and who was already sick, and I needed to put on my seatbelt. I could still see him in my mirror. He was standing right next to where I was, parked with his back to me. He was far enough away that I felt okay parking again to answer the phone, but I kept my engine running and I kept watching him. I don't want my mom to worry, so I told her everything is fine. Where I am, my ETA. Now that I was in my locked car away from him, I was beginning to feel like I had overreacted. She scolds me about speeding, and I tune her out because the guy is moving now. As my mom lectures me about road safety, I watch the guy cross to a truck, unlock the door and get in. The keys being locked in no longer seemed to be an issue for him. I watched the truck head back out to the freeway and drive out of sight. I had to pretend to be fine, not to upset my mom. I didn't get back onto the road for another 20 minutes, and when I did, I didn't speed. I did not want to see that truck. I found out years later that the closest city to that rest stop has a major problem with trafficking, and that girls who look like they don't live nearby, or maybe look like they are living out of their cars, tend to be targets. I don't know if that was what was happening, or if he was just trying to scare me into handing over my phone. Either way, creepy guy at the rest stop. Let's not meet. I guess I should give some background before I get into the story. I became homeless in late January, so I'm living in my car with my 120-pound female mastiff, who is a guardian breed. She keeps me very, very safe and always has. We have a routine in the mornings. First, I walk around my cousin's house. Then I go to the local rest stop to use the facilities, and brush my teeth and wash my face and whatnot. After that, I go to a park and ride right by the rest stop to walk my dog again. Because of the virus, lots of people frequent this park and ride to either sit and read, listen to podcasts or audiobooks, or to nap. Now, when I walk my dog, I leave the back door of my car open because she is old and arthritic, and it's hard for her to get in and out of the car. I usually have to lift her from under her belly to load her into the car. I also leave it open that way because she is fear aggressive with humans due to being abused as a puppy, and she is an aggressive dog. So I like to make sure I can get her in the car quickly if I need to. I also like to park my car between a large van and an SUV that are seemingly abandoned there and just left there for whatever reason, so that my car is kind of hidden and nobody will park by me. Last week, the van wasn't at the park and ride, so I parked to the left of the SUV, as usual, the huge space between my car and any others in that row. I was walking my dog in the grass pretty far away from my car, and as usual, I had the car running with the back door slightly open. I was far enough from it that you wouldn't know if it was mine if you passed by. While walking my dog, I noticed a flash of a silver car out of the corner of my eye and thought that I might be a state trooper. And if it was, because I had both paranoia and an anxiety disorder, that he might reprimand me for walking my dog there. I stayed calm and I continued to walk my dog, intent on getting her to do her business so we could get back in the car and leave. The car passed by once more, and I noticed that it wasn't a state police car. It was a silver Honda with an old man driving. He was purposely driving as close as he could to my dog and I without hitting the curb, and was literally just crawling the car along our path. When I turned around, he did too. He crept past once more, staring out of his open window at me the entire time, and not even watching the road. I got agitated at that point, and resigned myself to the idea that I would have to confront him if he continued to stalk us. He passed by once more, crawling again and trying to get closer. When he realized that I was heading for the cars, he turned around again. I got Karma, my dog, in the car and settled myself into the driver's seat, and took some time to give her a bowl of fresh, clean water, her treats, and took a moment to plug in my laptop to my inverter and charge it for later. I saw the silver car out of the corner of my eye again, and watched as the old man parked a few cars away from mine in the same row, next to a man in a black pickup truck that I noticed was watching this old man curiously. I was thankful the man in the truck was there and watching, and I noticed the way the old man was creeping by me and stalking me. The old man purposely reverse parked so his window was lined up with my driver's side window, and continued to belligerently stare at me from out of his open window, as I did what I needed to before I would leave the park and ride. He was leaning against his door with his head out, and just staring straight at me, not even blinking. I ignored him as I had been doing, carrying on with my business, checking Reddit while I plugged in my phone and organized the belongings in my front seat, and gathered up some garbage to put in the little garbage bag I keep on the floor of the front seat. I was raised to be tough and unafraid, and I wasn't going to let this creepy old man spook me. I looked up after about 10 minutes and he was still staring right at me, still not even blinking. So I turned my head and I avoided eye contact as I put on my seatbelt. I had been running the car the whole time I walked my dog, so I was good to go. I went to pull out of my spot and my backup camera went off, and I saw that dang silver car right behind me, impeding me from pulling out to my parking spot. At this point, I'm no longer trying to be polite. I give him a nasty look, don't even bother to stop my dog from barking at him, and I say, "I'm fine, thanks." He just nods and slowly, ever so slowly, crawls out of his parking space and down the lot towards the exit, and hangs there as if waiting for me to drive out. My instincts are telling me something is really off with this guy, but I'm trying to rationalize, chalking it up to my paranoia and anxiety and general distrust of people. I tell myself he's probably just a bit senile and means well. But still, I stay stubbornly in my spot and do not leave until he finally gives up and pulls out of the lot, going the opposite way that I was going to. The whole day, the entire incident bothered me. It wasn't until later when talking to my male friend that I realized how messed up the whole thing was. He didn't know which car was mine when he began stalking me. I was nowhere near it. Once I got in my car, he pulled up a few spots away to purposely continue watching me, and seeing that my car was clearly fine and running since I was blasting the AC, and had rolled up my windows without any difficulty. I've had cars that have broken down before, and I'm mechanically inclined enough, as my friend pointed out. If my car was broken down, I would have at least had my hood popped, and I would be elbows deep in my engine bay, checking my oil, my other fluids, my belts, my radiator, my battery, and my alternator. I've been there, I've done that a million times. Once again, he had the oxygen tube in his nose and no tank anywhere in sight. I drive an SUV and he was in a Honda sedan, so I was easily able to see into his vehicle. Nothing, nada. The fact that he insisted something was wrong with my car bothered me. It was as if he wanted me to get out of my car to either check, probably thinking because I'm a young, small female that I don't understand mechanics or know when something is wrong with my car, or to prove to him that it was fine. There were no signs at all that anything was wrong with my car, and if there was, I wouldn't be out walking my dog. I'd be in the engine bay on the phone with the towing company, and I would be highly stressed out and filthy. What's even more bothersome is he did this in broad daylight with people watching from the cars. He purposely stalked me as close as he could with his car, nearly driving in the grass, turning around and creeping slowly past me 3 times and following me as I walked, and then parking my car once he saw me get in it. I think he parked next to me and stared at me like that to try to take some time to figure out an excuse or a reason to approach me before he stopped me from leaving and pulled up next to me. The entire thing was incredibly uncomfortable, creepy, off, and gave me Ted Bundy vibes. After all, an elderly man with an oxygen tube in his nose doesn't look like he's capable of harming anyone. But boy, did he want me to get out of that car. Him hanging around the exit to try and catch me leaving was probably the worst of it all. It wasn't enough that he stalked and harassed me in the lot, no. Why not try to follow me to wherever I was going? So, old man at the park and ride with the oxygen tube that connects to nothing. Let's not meet, ever. This happened to my wife while we were dating. When we had started dating, I lived in southern New Hampshire while she lived in Philadelphia. Most of the time, I would come down and visit her. Since she works at a college, she had a few weeks off in December. She decided to come up and stay with me. She packed a week's worth of clothes and her cat in her car and drove up after work. Driving on interstates at night means coffee, which means bathroom breaks. She pulls into a rest stop in Connecticut. And by rest stop, I mean a bathroom, a vending machine, and a rack of tourist brochures. As she's walking towards the building, a man wearing jeans, an army jacket, and a knit cap walks out between 2 cars, startling her. The man immediately reaches out and grabs her head with both hands. He's standing in front of her, arms out straight. She's not able to pull his hands off her head. He's staring into her eyes with a detached expression. As she described it, it's the same expression I use when I'm trying to debug code or figure out why something isn't working. He's moving her head back and forth, keeping her off balance, while keeping her at arm's length. She stares back. He seems to evaluate her for a minute or two, and then lets go and quickly walks into a wooded section. She runs into the rest stop and finds an attendant. She uses the bathroom and then tells the attendant. The attendant is willing to walk her to her car and make sure that she leaves safely. She walks out with the attendant and notes that a white van that was previous in the lot is now gone. She gets in her car, thanks the attendant, and drives off. About 10 minutes later, she processed what happened and she calls me. The bit about the van worried her, but it terrifies me. We talk for a little bit. She's familiar with law enforcement and offenders and has a belief that this wasn't just a failed mugging. She talks to the police, but they didn't seem to be too interested in the incident. What worried her the most was that her cat would have suffered in the cold if something had happened to her. After that, every time I drove between New Hampshire and Pennsylvania, I would stop at that rest stop for a few minutes and look for white vans or that man. I don't know what I would have done or what could be done, but perhaps it's some small way of talking myself into believing that we have control over our lives. Perhaps there's a man in a green army jacket who believes he's found a different way of believing he has control over what happens in life. This happened about a year ago, so the details may be a bit fuzzy. For some background, I drive half an hour to the next town over for a summer community theater group. Practices occasionally run long, and my friends and I like to hang out at McDonald's when the practices run late because, by that time, most of us are really hungry. It was a clear summer night. If I recall, it was about 10 or 10:30. Curfew in my hometown was 11 that night, and since I was only 17, I had to get home in good time. The cops are usually pretty chill since I live in a small town, but I didn't want to risk it. At that point, most of my friends were already leaving, but my friend Emma was still waiting on a bacon cheeseburger. I had to use the restroom, so I told her that I would wait with her. No young woman really needs to be out alone late at night in a relatively dark parking lot after all. I went to the restroom, and when I came out, Emma was gone. Oof. I called her boyfriend, Steven. Hello? Hi, is Emma with you? Yeah, she's going home with me. Okay, and Peter? He's a friend who can't drive. Is he with you too? Yeah. We continue to talk as I walk out into the parking lot. I hear a lot of yelling to my left and see that two younger men in a really beat up old red Chevy are screaming at the drive-thru microphone box. It's almost 10:30, so the drive-thru worker is probably helping to shut down the rest of the restaurant. And they notice me staring and they wave. I wave back. Nothing weird yet, just standard protocol for random strangers. Oof again. I walk across the parking lot towards my car, taking a second to notice the irony of not wanting Emma to walk across the dark parking lot. Meanwhile, here I am, a young woman walking alone across said dark parking lot. Triple oof. I climb in my car and get ready to go. I'm still on the phone with Steven at this point. Just as I start my car, the old red Chevy pulls up, right next to my Jeep. The mirrors could have bumped. They were so close on the driver's side. They wave, looking just a little bit lower than my eyes, or even my entire face for that matter. I wave again, this time making it seemingly very clear by the look on my face that I'm not interested in escalating the situation any further. At this point, I had been taking martial arts for a few years now, so I knew I could defend myself if necessary. But it's better to entirely avoid situations where you may have to use martial arts anyway. Steven notices that my tone of voice has changed. Hey, are you okay? Yeah, there are two creepy dudes in an old red Chevy parked right next to me. I may have to call you back. Oh, do you want me to come back and scare them off? No, I think I'll be fine. No reason to drag you back into town over this. Okay, but if you don't text me once you get home, I'm calling the cops within 2 hours. Sounds great, thanks. We hang up. The two creeps are still staring at me. Then they wave a third time. I don't bother with being polite this time. I reach over and I lock the doors, and then look them in the eyes to let them know that I am onto them. They then start to get out of the truck. No way. I throw it into reverse and I get the heck out of Dodge. I hope I ran over someone's foot, I really do. I look back over my shoulder to see if they're following me, but they're back at the drive-thru yelling, trying to get the poor workers' attention. It was as if they had never left. I raced home, texted Steven to let him know that I was home, and I called it a day. My friend Anna and I were bored one weekend, and decided to go to a popular beach to take some pictures and just mess around. So, we took pictures and had a really lovely day. And then on the way back, we were starving, so we decided to stop at McDonald's in the beach town. This town is like really famous and it's nice. A bunch of celebrities live there and it's beautiful. There's also a super famous restaurant right off the highway on the beach that's known for celebrities and rich people going. And this McDonald's was directly across the street from the restaurant. Since so many famous people go to this restaurant and it's on a pretty busy road, most of them have drivers that take them, usually in Escalades. The driver would usually hang out in the parking lot of that McDonald's, while their bosses ate across the street. Anna and I didn't know this at the time, and we just wanted a McFlurry. So, we go to McDonald's and right when we get out of the car, she starts acting really weird. She triple checks that the car doors are locked and grabs her fancy camera to bring inside. I asked her what's up, and she said that there is a group of guys, the drivers, standing in front of McDonald's smoking and staring at us, and it was giving her the creeps. I'm a pretty chill and trusting person, so I don't think much of it. It's a busy place and a super nice town. I'm not worried. We go in and there are a few other people in there about our age. We get our food and we sit at the table to eat. One of the drivers comes in and sits a few booths down with his back to the wall, right where he can see us. My back is to him, but Anna gets really creeped out and wants to leave. This guy isn't eating or anything. He's just staring at us. Again, this is a pretty crowded McDonald's in a nice town in Southern California, so I feel pretty safe. Living in South Central, you get used to the odd creep. But still, Anna was freaked out, so I agreed to go. I just had to run to the bathroom first. It was one of those McDonald's where the counter and main dining room were in one big room. And then there was a sort of a hallway off to the side of the counter with more seating, and the bathroom at the end, way in the back. There was also a door going outside, right next to the bathrooms. The bathroom only had 2 stalls. I just walked into the first stall, not really paying attention to whether or not anyone else was in there. So, I'm in there doing my thing and then I hear the door open, and I hear Anna call my name. At this point, I'm really confused because she's supposed to be watching our stuff, and I'm like, "Yeah, what's up? Are you okay?" "Yeah," I reply. She was like, "Oh, okay," and just stands there in the doorway. After a second, I hear her leave and I'm thinking, that's very weird. So I walk out of the bathroom and see her waiting by the door with all of her stuff in her hands. I ask her what's going on and why she came in the bathroom, and she just looks at me really panicky and is like, "We need to leave right now." At this point, I'm still not afraid, just confused. We rush out to the car, and she starts telling me what happened. It turns out, when I walked into the bathroom, the creepy driver followed me in a little while after. I don't remember hearing him come in, but maybe I did and just assumed someone had either been in the stall next to me and was leaving, or somebody had just come in to check their makeup or something. I'll be honest, I really wasn't paying attention. I know for sure I wasn't aware that anyone had entered the stall next to me, because he didn't close the stall door when he came in. She was on her phone, so she didn't see him follow me either. A young guy noticed it and went up to my friend, asking if we knew the driver. Frantic, she told him that we did not and ran to check on me. He was in the stall next to me with the stall door open. It was the large handicap stall, not making a sound. She came in and didn't see him, so she called my name to make sure that I was still alive, and he rushed out of the stall past her. She was in shock, and didn't know what to do other than gather our things and prepare to run. When we went to her car, he was sitting in the Escalade with tinted windows next to us, still staring. We sped off, and when I got this story, we called the McDonald's to let them know what happened. They didn't really care, and then we called the non-emergency sheriff line to report it as well, which was closed. Thank you Malibu for nothing. Eventually, my mom went full on mama bear and threatened to blast it all over social media that they didn't take my report seriously, and got hold of someone at corporate from there. They checked their cameras and they saw the guy follow me in. A police report was made, so hopefully this never happens to anyone else again. Thank God nothing happened, but it was really scary. The guy was sitting in his car staring at us when we left. Who knows what he was planning on doing. So, guy in the McDonald's bathroom. Let's not meet. It all started at a friend's house. Myself and 2 others were invited to hang out with a buddy who I'll be calling Chris. As for the 2 others, they will be James and Annie. It was around 10:45 p.m. when we arrived to his house. Upon our arrival, we walked up to his front door. I reached my hand out to knock on the door. As soon as my fist made contact to the door, it flew open. An excited Chris greeted us with a loud, "Hello!" We all greeted each other and then made our way into his home. We all sat down in his living room. We talked for a few minutes when Chris says, "I am so hungry." "Go eat something then," Annie said. "Like what?" Chris yelled. We shushed him, and that's when James said, "How about we go get some McDonald's?" As soon as those words left James' mouth, Chris jumped up and stood next to the front door. "Let's go eat," he said with an excited tone. I stood up and I made my way to Chris. I didn't want to go, but I was hungry. Annie sighed and she stood up. It was obvious that she didn't want to go either, but it was free food. She knew that we would pay for her. After we got all our jackets and shoes on, we left the house. I won't bore you with these small details of our walk. The scary stuff happened around the halfway mark. We walked for around 10 minutes when we saw a lady. She was wearing a white t-shirt with a bunch of different colored stains on it, and a pair of blue shorts that barely fit her. As we got closer, we realized that she was talking, but no one was next to her. I remember a little bit of what she said, something about Utah State and the lady next door. I was pretty paranoid and thought as we walked past her, someone in the bushes would jump out and attack us. As we got closer, I said loud enough for her to hear me, "Last one to McDonald's has to pay." And with that, we all broke out into a sprint. Right before we passed her, Chris stopped right in front of the lady. As I went by Chris, I noticed that he was talking to her. And this is when I got a good look at her. It was dark out, but I could still make out a head of crust, black-brown hair. She had dark eyes that seemed to have something in them, something that made me feel bad for her. She had brown, rotting teeth, and her breath smelled like death. I tapped Chris on his shoulder, but he pushed my hand away as he was still engaged in conversation with this lady, who I now know as Linda. "Where are you kids heading?" she said, her voice dry and raspy. "Just to McDonald's," Chris answered. "How old are you guys?" she said. Her face was twitching as she said it. 15, he answered. And with that, a huge grin appeared on her face. She slowly stood up, causing all of us to back away. She took a step closer, and with that, we ran. She gave chase, all the while screaming things like, "I'm not gonna hurt ya. And oh, come on, you scared of a little old lady." She was frail and looked like a skeleton. I don't know how she was able to move at the speed that she was. The big golden arches appeared in front of us, and we ran faster. She realized that she couldn't catch us, so she picked up a rock and threw it at us. It hit me in the back. As we got closer to McDonald's, we heard her scream things like, "Stupid kids, and I'm gonna get y'all." We pushed through the McDonald's entrance and started panting. Annie slouched down into a seat with James while Chris and I went to order. We got our food and we all sat down. We ate in silence, as we were all still pretty shook by what had happened. Once we were done eating, we started heading back to Chris's home. We had seen the lady in the gas station across the street. We ran so she wouldn't see us. In the end, we made it back safe and sound, and this is now a story that we can all laugh about. I understand this isn't the scariest story, but to my buddies and I, it was terrifying. I've never really thought this experience as a particularly scary one, but the feeling of being trapped strangely resonates with me to this day. For a little bit of backstory, I was going to meet up with my friends and future roommates at the realtor office. We had all met about a week previous and already pooled our money together in order to pay for the apartment's rent, a steep $3,500. I was more or less taking the lead on finding and acquiring the apartment. Therefore, I was also delegated to holding everyone's money. I'm a timely person, and I don't like being anywhere late, so I managed to get to the realtor's office about 30 minutes early. Having missed lunch, I decided to just get a few things from the dollar menu at the McDonald's next door. I walk in and it's your fundamental McDonald's. A few college kids, a few homeless people, and an older Asian gentleman sitting at a table by himself adjacent to the bathroom. I had to go to the bathroom, so I make my way over there and walk into the bathroom to do my thing. It's a one-person bathroom and the door was broken a bit, disabling it from ever being able to fully close. I start to pee when I hear a few steps from behind and a weird chuckle. I'm not usually good at stopping midstream, but this time, however, I was on point. I turn around and see him trying to close the door behind me and clumsily fumble with the standard silver lock that are in those types of bathrooms. My mind, knowing that I have $3,500 in my backpack, instantly goes to a fight reaction. I lunge over to him and grab his shoulders, pushing him up against the wall and only manage to say the words, "No." While I'm saying these things, he's still smiling and chuckling the whole time, which is the most vivid thing I remember from the endeavor. I then push him out of the way, leave the McDonald's and go straight to the realtor. It's fully possible that this was a normal guy expecting it to be a bigger bathroom, and for that, I give him the benefit of the doubt. That being said, I'm still morbidly curious that what would have happened if I didn't manage to stop peeing halfway through that day. This happened to me a few years ago. It's not super creepy, but I get chills when I think about it. Shortly after graduating from high school, I decided to work a few odd jobs in an attempt to raise money for college. One of those jobs ended up being at the State Fair of Texas. Now, because I didn't have a car, I had to be dropped off with my dad at the front gate fairly early in the morning and wait for them to open. I hated waiting there, but I didn't have much of a choice. Anyway, one morning while waiting for the gates to open, I realized that I really had to go to the bathroom. I decided to run across the street and use the restroom at the nearby McDonald's. I thought I might even use my pit stop there as an excuse to buy a McMuffin or something. As I enter the bathroom, I see that it's occupied by another man. Although he's not using the toilet, he's got a big backpack sitting next to him on the floor, and it looks like he's changing his clothes or something. Not wanting to be rude or stare, I decide to ignore him and go about my business. Now, this bathroom is pretty small. There's only one stall, a urinal next to it, and a sink. The guy is not in the stall, so as I'm using the urinal, he's basically standing right behind me. I'm already feeling a little uncomfortable and I'm hoping I can quickly do my business and leave. But of course, he feels the need to try and carry on a conversation with me. I'm wearing my work uniform and he asks me if I'm working at the fair across the street. I say yes, and he starts going on about how lucky I am to have a job, and how tough it is to make a buck nowadays. Meanwhile, I'm just wishing I hadn't had so much coffee because this is taking forever, and I'm just wanting to get the heck out of there. He continues to tell me his life story and gives me some sob story about his girlfriend and his mother and how he's now homeless, and asks me if I could please buy him some food. I like to think I'm a good person, so I figure I'll go ahead and buy this guy something to eat. What's the harm? Even if he is a scam artist, McDonald's is pretty cheap, so I agree. However, he then suggests that I get him something at a nearby grocery store. I suppose the food is cheaper there or something, and assume he's just trying to be nice and help me get a better deal. I wasn't too sure where he was talking about, but he told me to follow him and he would lead me there. According to him, it was just down the block. So, we exit the McDonald's and begin walking down this back alley on our way to some store that I'd never heard of. I didn't see any buildings nearby that looked like the kind of store that he was talking about, and I walked with him for a few minutes down this alleyway before I snapped out of it. All of a sudden, I realized how sketchy this whole situation is, and I stopped in my tracks. I turn to the guy and say, "Hey, why don't I just buy you something to eat at McDonald's? We're already here. Doesn't that make more sense?" He paused for a minute, and then told me that I could get a way better deal at this other place. I told him that I really didn't mind, and that I would buy him whatever he wanted at McDonald's. He begrudgingly agreed and we both walked back. I think I ended up buying him 2 breakfast platters or something. He thanked me for the food, but he seemed much less sincere after I decided not to follow him through the alley. I don't know if he really did have an ulterior motive, or if he was just being a little off-kilter, but something didn't seem right about him. Whatever it was, let's not meet again. A little over a year ago, I had a job working overnight at a gas station close to my house. I'm a woman, and I was 31 at the time. I know, to some it seems unsafe for a woman to work a graveyard shift by herself. However, it was a slow store and the sheriff's office was about 20 feet across from it. I really didn't think that I would have that many problems. There would be about 30 customers in an 8-hour shift, and that was on a busier night. It was about 3:30 in the morning. I went outside to sweep the parking lot and last minute checked the trash cans. It was time for a cigarette and I had one headphone in kinda jamming out. Across the road in the parking lot of the sheriff's office, I saw a figure with his back to me. He was swaying back and forth while looking down. Honestly, it looked like he was enjoying a much-needed piss. Against the sheriff's office, though. Yeah, the building closed at 4 p.m. and didn't open until 6 the next morning, but why? By the back of his ripped white t-shirt, I remember that he had come in about 4 hours earlier. He was a total creep, and I could tell that he already had a good buzz going. I didn't say anything. I just took my eyes off of him and tried not to draw attention to myself. It was working until a car pulled in. I was still outside as they pulled up. I saw him look at the car and then at me, and back and forth again. As the customer was leaving, I walked her outside. I still had half a smoke burning and I had left my dustpan outside with the squeegee. We both heard him start to swear angrily and seemingly enraged in an argument with himself. She looked across the road and told me to be careful. I made an awkward joke about him being the one who should be more afraid of me or something like that. The man was still there but closer to the road, now facing the parking lot of my store. Whatever he was yelling was completely unintelligible. He was obviously very drunk, and he could barely stand straight, still swaying away. I didn't engage him, but I didn't take my eyes off of him this time. I just slowly walked back into the store. Something about his face really bothered me. It had a darkness to it, but his eyes looked wild. My experience during graveyard jobs had been that the crazy-eyed ones are the worst ones. It didn't look like it at all, and I wanted no part of it. I still had almost 3 hours to go and 2 before any other employees got there. Instantly, I went to the computer and I typed up a temporarily closed sign, just in case he wanted trouble. I was coming around the corner on my way to the doors when I saw that he had walked across the road to my side now. I literally just barely got the second door locked when he stumbled into a very small parking lot. My hand mimed the hand signal for cut across my neck, and basically saying, "Nope, sorry, you can't come in here, we're closed." I shook my head back and forth too, hoping to further discourage him. He started walking away but screamed something at me while he was walking. I don't mean he was grumpy and shouted at me or yelled that I was an asshole or anything. I mean like he was at an enraged volume and was violently throwing his hands everywhere. Definitely knowing that I'm in the wrong shift of the wrong job, I got really skeeved out. I decided to call the cops, and it's a good thing too, because the minute that I hung up with him, there he comes again up to the door. He starts pulling and banging on it. He backs up and runs into it, trying to ram it. Not that it would have done any good. I made the mistake of telling him that I had called the cops and that his ass was about to be grass. I say that I made the mistake of telling him because once I said that, he took off. The police never found him. They drove around the road and surrounding neighborhoods for over an hour, but they found no one. He was on foot, so I don't know where he could have gone to. He didn't harm me, and with them not finding him, I didn't fill out a police report or anything. I was safe behind thick glass doors that were locked for the rest of my shift. It just sucked. Maybe if I didn't warn him ahead of time, I wouldn't have had to spend the last 3 months of my job constantly looking over my shoulder. I'll never know what the right choice was. I'm just glad that I don't work there anymore. About 7 years ago, when I was 17, my parents went out of town for a weekend and left me at home. This was a pretty common occurrence. My parents trusted me. I would usually spend these weekends away, staying with friends or family, as my parents' house is a bit creepy to be alone in, even during the day. We live in a small rural town where everyone knows each other, and generally, it's pretty quiet and safe. Saturday, I was supposed to stay with a friend, but her parents decided at the last minute not to let me stay. It wasn't a big deal that I had to leave. I was somewhat prepared to have to go home because her parents got weird about company sometimes. I left her house, which is about 15 minutes from my parents' house, around 9:30 or 9:45. While I was on the way home, I got a weird feeling that I can't really explain. I just knew that I didn't want to go stay at my parents alone. I called my brother and I asked him if I could stay with him. At the time, he was living with a woman who had a small child. He told me that it would be quieter and easier for him to just come stay with me, since his dog would bark if I tried to come in the house. He said he would be to our parents' house in about 20 minutes. A side note that's relevant later. My brother's a relatively scary-looking guy. He's about 6'3", 200 pounds, pretty muscular and covered in tattoos. After hanging up, I decided to stop at the gas station and grab a snack before going home, so that my brother would be there when I got there. I pulled into the gas station. There were only a few cars on the lot, which is typical because this is a small town in the rural south, where everything pretty much stops after 8 p.m. I parked and I walked up to the door. There was a man standing outside the door smoking. He opened the door for me without saying anything. This is normal southern hospitality, especially since I'm a female. I smiled and thanked him. Inside, there was another man standing by the door. I noticed him staring at me as soon as I came in. He gave me that gross up and down look and said something to the effect of, "Hey sexy, what are you doing alone?" Creepy as heck. I just ignored him and I walked towards the back of the store. But he yelled after me and kept calling me names. I still ignored him. I figured that he was drunk or high, or just being annoying. Most people around here talk a big game but rarely back it up. I wasn't scared, just annoyed. I got my snacks and I paid at the counter. When I walked back up to the door, both of the men were gone. I was happy to not have to deal with any more catcalling. I began walking across the lot towards my car, which was probably about 100 feet away from the door. As I was walking, I looked down at my phone to see if enough time had passed for my brother to be at my parents'. When I looked up, the one guy who had hit on me was standing at the pumps, staring. I looked at him for a second and continued walking. "Hey, you know you're supposed to answer a man when he speaks to you," he said. I remember saying something snarky back to him and getting in my car. He looked pissed at my sarcasm. I locked my doors as soon as I was in my car, started it, and I was thinking of nothing but getting home to eat my snacks and hang out with my brother. I put my car in gear and realized that the man had disappeared. I looked around before pulling out of my parking spot, only to realize that both men were sitting in the car facing mine across the lot. They were both staring at me and talking, occasionally even pointing towards me. I just stared at them, defiant and upset. I didn't want them to think that they had scared me at all. While we were sitting having our staring contest, the man who had opened the door for me smiled and gave me the finger across the throat gesture, as in, "You're dead." I rolled my eyes and I pulled out of the gas station annoyed. To my dismay, they pulled out behind me. I hadn't been scared up until this point because, as I said, most people here are a lot of talk with no follow-through. Instead of going home, I took a few back roads that connect back in a sort of circle to see if they were following me, which of course they were. When they realized that I was testing them, they drove up really close to me and started laying on the horn. I couldn't see their headlights, they were so close. I called my brother and told him what was going on. He told me to come home and that he would handle it. I started driving home. The two men were still on my butt blowing the horn. Even with my detours, I was about 3 to 4 minutes from my parents' house. I slowed down to pull in my driveway and was immediately relieved. At the end of the driveway, my brother was standing shirtless, with his shoulders back, hand crossed in front of his stomach, clearly holding a pistol, his intimidating looking pit bull sitting by his side. I drove around him into the yard. The two guys actually started to pull in behind me until they saw my brother, and then they hightailed it out of there. I have no idea what they would have done if I had stopped somewhere alone or kept driving. I always think fondly of that image of him standing there like a badass ready to protect me. I'm thankful that he was there. This happened a year or so ago, so forgive a lack of specific detail. One day after work around 4 or 5 p.m., my girl and I, that I worked with, decided to go see a movie. It was a rough shift and her and I felt like a movie would be nice. She asked if we could stop by her house so that she could change clothes from our work uniform, and I said that it's fine, since it was maybe 5 minutes away tops. We stayed at her house for a bit, we ate a quick snack, and then got into my car. She asked if we could stop by the gas station by her house so she could grab a Red Bull. Once again, I was fine with that because it was right by her house. I drove to the gas station, and the only parking was on the side of an abandoned car wash next to the station. To form a better image, the gas station and the car wash were right next to each other, both entrances facing the same way. It was entirely dark outside. The gas station was a fairly run-down one and didn't have any lights at the gas pumps like most do. So, it was pitch black except for the light coming from my car. A semi-truck was on the side of the gas station and had cones indicating the area that would inhibit the driver to do what he needed. So, I assumed the parking spots wouldn't be too close and I parked. My friend got out and went inside. I decided to stay in the car since she would only be a few minutes. I locked my doors after she got out, as it was a force of habit to do so. I went on my phone for a bit. After a couple of minutes, I saw a light flash on in the driver's side mirror of my car. I turned to look, since it was pointed in my direction. The truck driver had a flashlight pointed at my window, and just held it there for a few seconds, maybe 20 or so. I was kind of freaked out, but I assumed that he had a reason for doing so. He began walking towards my window, still with the flashlight on. I rolled down my window, no more than an inch, assuming maybe he was going to tell me to move my car or something. He stopped when he got 2 to 3 feet away from my window and then turned around. At this point, I was pretty scared, just because there was no reason for what he did. So I just rolled my window back up and I waited for my friend. I'm still watching the guy just in case, and I see him rummage around in the front part of his semi-truck for a bit. And then he stopped and he turned back to my car. There was something in his hand, I'm not sure what, and I'm glad that I didn't find out. He began walking towards my window. He was saying something inaudible, and it was at a rather loud volume. He got to my door this time and tried to open it. He tried to pull the handle a couple of times, but he couldn't open it, and then he started pulling more aggressively. My friend came out of the gas station and was walking towards my car. She looked scared. I was scared. The guy saw her come into my car and walked quickly back to his truck, and I drove away as quick as possible. I'm not entirely sure what happened or what was going to happen. The only theory my friend had was that maybe when he saw that I was a girl, the first time that he had the flashlight, he assumed that I would be a good target to kidnap or put into trafficking. That's just a theory though. I'm glad I won't ever have to find out what he was doing. It was the middle of the night, maybe 12 or 1 in the morning, and I had snuck out to get a bag of chips or something from the gas station a few blocks away from my house. It was the middle of December, and it was snowing pretty heavily outside. For the record, I was 14 or 15 at the time. I've always been pretty small, at about 5'4" in height, and 115 pounds in weight. I'm female, but I've always had short hair and kind of a boyish face. The gas station was completely empty, besides a woman behind the cash register, who I remember had been far too busy with filing her nails to pay too much attention. I had been picking through some of the chip bags to find something good, when I heard the ding of the door as someone entered the small gas station. I didn't bother to look to see who it was. When I finally found what I was looking for, I turned to start heading towards the refrigerated section for a drink, before seeing the person who had just walked through the door. It was a tall, thin man, maybe 6'2", with brown hair, a red trucker hat and a short, scruffy beard. He looked like he was in his late 30s or early 40s. I was surprised that I didn't recognize the man. I lived in a small mountain town, and everyone knew everyone. Oddly enough, he was wearing a short-sleeved t-shirt and shorts, despite it being freezing cold outside. His shirt and pants were covered in grass stains, as if he had just been working on a lawn or something. He turned to me and smiled a toothy grin, before moving away from the door to the refrigerated area so that I could grab what I needed. I knew I shouldn't have seen anything wrong with this, but something about the grin and the way that his eyes looked me over was already kind of a red flag. I've always been a very nervous and paranoid person. I moved in and I opened the door, quickly grabbing a drink and backing off. Before I could turn away, I heard the man's raspy voice as he spoke to me. "Hey, you look familiar," the man said. He had a somewhat southern accent, which wasn't that uncommon considering where I lived. "Oh, yeah," I responded, not sure what to say to him. He introduced himself as Thomas before leaning against the door. "Why is a young man like you doing out this late?" he asked. Again, I wasn't sure what to say. I wasn't a boy for one thing, but I didn't bother to correct him. Just getting a snack," I responded, trying to inch my way away, trying to give off the hint that I did not want to talk. Yet the man just trailed behind me. "Do you know my daughter?" he asked me, cutting off one of the aisles. "Well, who's your daughter?" I asked shakily in response. The man frowned at me, his eyes narrowing in my direction. He refused to tell me her name, claiming that he didn't want boys touching her daughter. I was confused by the sudden change of mood, so I didn't say anything else. I started making my way towards the register before he cut me off again. "Do you need a ride? It's cold out there," he said, getting uncomfortably close. At this point, I could smell the alcohol on Thomas's breath, It made me very uncomfortable. "No thank you," I said, trying to move around him. He insisted, and yet again I refused. I moved to try and push past him, bumping into a metal shelf. A can of chips fell off the shelf, hitting the floor. The lady behind the register looked up from what she was doing, noticing me and the man. "Are you ready to check out?" she asked me, glaring at Thomas. I nodded and the man moved out of my way. I paid for the chips and drink, before thanking the woman and moving out of the gas station. But it didn't end there. When I began my walk down the snowy road, I saw the man get into his truck before getting out a minute later. He was already quite a ways away when he began walking in the same direction that I was. I would have called someone for help at this point, but I didn't have a phone at the time. I had quickened my pace and eventually, he turned around and he went home. I don't want to think about what would have happened if the man would have kept following me. So Thomas, I don't think we should meet again. Back in 1984, when I was practically still a baby, my parents were having a rough time making ends meet. Since my parents thought it would be a genius idea to have 4 kids with no savings to speak of, they couldn't afford an apartment, so we had to move into a local motel with weekly rates. We lived there for about a year. My dad was the only one working, and my older sister was in 2nd grade at the time, so my mom was stuck tending to 3 children, all under the age of 4 for most of the day on her own. I don't remember living there since I was so young, but I was told about the place more than once growing up, which I assume was as a reminder of how far we had come as a family. One morning when Dad was getting ready for work and Mom got my older sister ready for school, Mom noticed a shadow of a man against the pulled curtains of the bedroom. My mom is a notorious scaredy cat, so she hustled my sister towards the bathroom, where Dad was, and hissed, "There is someone outside the window." My dad kind of rolled his eyes at her but looked out toward the front anyway to see if he could see anything. When he saw the shadow, his attitude changed. He snuck quietly but quickly across the room and opened the door. The man who had been standing outside the window immediately turned and ran off away from the motel into the street blindly. My dad narrowed his eyes at his retreating back and closed the door, figuring if the guy was violent, he would have started some stuff instead of running away. He advised my mom to keep the curtains closed over the window for the day, and to stay home with the door locked until he got home later, in case the guy came back. My mom didn't want my dad to leave, but my dad reminded her that he had to, or else he wouldn't get paid for the day. So Mom reluctantly agreed and sent Dad and sister on their way. Later that afternoon, I was being an annoying little crybaby, so Mom instructed my older brother to play quietly with my younger sister and watch Sesame Street while she tried to soothe me into a nap on the couch. My mom was sitting on the couch, patting my back while I bawled for no reason, when she glanced at the front window to see if there was anyone standing there. And sure enough, there was. And my mom freaked out, snatched me up from the couch, which caused me to cry harder than I already was. God, I was a bad baby. And locked the 3 of us in the bathroom so she could call Dad at work and then lock herself in with us. My dad skipped out of work and ran back home. When he got there, the guy was still standing at our window, with his hands cupped around his face like he was trying to get a better look through the gap in the curtains. My dad didn't even give the guy a warning. He just punched him in the head as soon as he got close enough. The guy stumbled away from the window in a daze and Dad slapped him around, all the while yelling things like, "You think it's okay to scare people? You think it's okay to scare my wife and my kids? I'll show you what happens when you creep around windows." My dad hit him a few more times before the motel manager showed up and stopped him, thinking my dad was just beating up some random guy. The window creeper, unfortunately, got away during the confusion. He never came back. 2.5 years ago, I was what you might call the right hand for my boss who owned the motel that I worked for, technically as a head housekeeper. But I had recently begun training to run the full spectrum of the motel, including all things office and front desk, overseeing staff and minor maintenance so that my boss could take a vacation. It was a 42-room mom and pop place set back off the road, so it was pretty peaceful for the most part. There was still a few mildly ones every now and then, but that's at any motel in small town USA. But as intimidating as the new responsibility sounded, with only 2 other staff members to worry about, it was a cakewalk. The day comes for the boss to take her leave, and I'm now in charge of her life's blood, sweat and tears, and pumped for the opportunity to show what I was made of. She left Friday morning, and the rest of the day ran like clockwork, until around 8:30 that night. I also lived on the property in an apartment which allowed me to run back and forth to the office for guest check-ins and any office duties that I needed to attend to. So when the ring the doorbell alerted, I looked at my phone and saw an older gentleman, early 60s maybe, staring through the door looking for an attendant. I spoke through the camera to let him know that I would be there in 30 seconds, and I started on my way to the office. As I would with any guest, while checking them in, I made small talk about his trip and gave the lowdown on where the good food in town was. I got him squared away in the computer and I showed him how to get to his room. As he was getting his credit card situated back in his wallet, I thanked him for staying with us and called him Mr. Logan. He looked up at me and smiled and said that I should call him Joe, and he made his way out of the office. Less than 30 minutes had passed and I got a call from room 135, Joe's room. He proceeds to tell me that he would like to use the desk lamp, but there's no light bulb in it, and could he please get one, which immediately threw up a red flag because I cleaned the room myself, and I had made a habit to check every light bulb in the room, and I know for a fact the light bulb was there because I used the desk lamp as I was cleaning. I told him that I would bring one down, and he immediately said he would rather come to the office to get it. The office was attached to an apartment-type space that my boss lived in during the week, and it was very dark in the back, and set up in a way that would have made it very difficult, if not impossible, to see through the door to the apartment. Considering I was the only employee on the property, having him come to my very secluded office in the dark wasn't going to happen. I felt more comfortable taking it to his room, which was an old drive-up style setup, where I knew there were other guests around that area that were sitting outside and could help me if I needed it. So when he said that he would rather come to my office, I told him I would have to bring it to him because my boss would kill me if I made a guest change a light bulb. He says that he understands, and I breathe a little easier. He's not going to get me cornered in my secluded office to do God knows what. So I grab the light bulb, and before I can get to the front door, I look and there he is, looking through the glass on the door, staring me down in the most unsettling way. The hair on the back of my neck stood up and I physically started shaking. I opened the door and just said, "Let's get your lamp working," and started walking past him. He then said that he thinks he forgot to sign his credit card receipt, and can we go double check? I tell him that I had already dropped the receipt, but that I would check in the morning and get it from him if I needed it. That was total crap. He made a big deal about finding his good pen to sign it with. We both know that he signed it. With that rejected idea, we continued to his room. As I walked in, I kicked the doorstop wedge that I brought with me under the door, so it couldn't close without assistance. And had he tried, I would have had time to yell for help from the guys next door to him. I think he figured that out and he moved away from the door. As I put the bulb in the lamp and turned to leave, I noticed the original light bulb halfway sticking out from under the couch pillow. I picked up my pace, chose to say nothing, and I laughed. I made sure that he didn't see where I went because I sure didn't want him to know that I lived there or which apartment was mine. 30 minutes later and the phone rings again. Of course, it's Joe. This time he would like extra coffee for in the morning. I tell him that I'm unable to get into the housekeeping supply room because the housekeeper accidentally took it home. It's a total lie, but I wasn't going back over there. He had me legitimately scared. He called 2 more times that night, but I changed my voicemail to the motel's information and let him leave a message. I never even checked them. Bad customer service for my first night running the place alone, but I really didn't think my boss would entertain the idea of penalizing me after she heard the whole story. The next morning starts out as quiet as usual. I was running audits when Joe shows up at the door. I wasn't scared this time because I had one of my housekeepers getting coffee in the kitchen, and people were coming and going and checking out. Joe asked me to go to breakfast with him. I explained that I'm on the clock and I have a business to keep afloat for my boss, but thank you for the offer. I'm not sure exactly what went down in the next 2 hours because I was working, but somewhere in there, Joe's car quit working. He was trying to get to the next town over, which is significantly bigger than my town for one reason or another. Anyway, he starts getting unreasonably angry that his car won't start, saying things like, "What am I supposed to do without a freaking car?" and whatnot. And then it dawns on him that there is a car dealership next door, and he starts off in that direction. But before he gets too far away, he sees me coming out of a room and says, "You're gonna marry me. Just wait and see. We're going to Vegas," all while smiling and chuckling. So I chuckled too because there's no way that he is being serious, I hoped. I continued on with my day. About 5 hours passed and I get a phone call from the dealership asking if Mr. Logan had checked out. I said he was booked for one more night, and he proceeds to tell me that Joe took a car for a test drive and was supposed to return in 30 minutes. But he hadn't returned and wasn't answering phone calls. They asked if I could check in his room to see if his belongings were still there. I obliged. I opened his door after knocking with no response, and found the room completely destroyed. Papers all over the place, trash on the floor, pictures off the wall, the whole nine. But I wasn't sure if the papers were something that he would come back for, or if he bailed and just left that stuff behind. Aside from the papers, the only other personal belongings were a pair of swim trunks and a pair of socks. Again, was that worth coming back for? So, I tell the dealership that I'm not 100% sure that he's coming back, and they call the police. After another couple of hours, the police show up at the motel, Joe in tow. He had decided since he paid up until the next day, I would just leave his stuff in there in case he returned, which I honestly didn't think would happen. He goes in and starts taking things out of his room, and that's when the cop comes up to me and, being a small town, knows me and pulls me aside. He says, "Hey, you need to thank God every night that you're still alive and well here." I said, "Okay, what makes you say that?" He said, "That man had every intention of taking you with him tonight and going somewhere you would never be looked for in. I don't know that he would have let you live. He's a sick man. We're taking him for a psych evaluation and then to the county if he's okay for general population." He then says that I should call my boss and let her know what was happening, and maybe take my own vacation for a few days, just in case they can't make the car theft thing stick, since the dealership no longer wanted to press charges, given his psychological state, and that was technically the only law that he broke. They also said they would patrol the motel every hour or so to check on me if he was released. I was completely taken aback by this whole ordeal, and to this day wonder how he planned on getting me out of there, and what he was going to do if he did. He was released after 24 hours, but I never saw him again, and I'm okay with that. When I was 7 or 8, my family went to the beach and rented a room. We had the kinds of rooms where you rent out both and they connect through a door. Like there's a door to leave the room and the door to the other room. In the room connected to ours, there was this army family, a military dad, some kids and a wife. My older sister was supposed to be watching me, as we were down at the jacuzzi during the evening. As we were playing and hanging out and just having a good time, I didn't get out much. I was naive and all around a little kid. And this mom literally sits in the jacuzzi with us. She starts talking to us and is just making herself really comfortable. I was very naive as a kid, as I said. Eventually, we start talking books and she talks about her kids, who are never even seen. And we're just having a good conversation. Really in depth, it felt like. My sister decides that she wants to go back to the room, but I don't. I wanted to stay and talk with the mom. So my sister goes back to the room and now it's just 7-year-old me and some 40-year-old woman. It should have set off some creepy alarms, but it didn't. So she starts talking about going and walking on the beach. It's like 10 p.m. and she wants to go walk on the beach and get shells. I thought it was a great idea. I would get to walk on the beach at night. I felt so free and like a big kid. I didn't need my sister or anything. So I run back to the room and tell my grandparents that I'm walking on the beach with Sue, or whatever her name was. I remember my grandmother reading her book, barely listening to what I said. She just shooed me off. It's important to know that I didn't live with my parents. So I start walking down the creepy motel corridor. It was a really dark, dim stairwell. So I'm going through the stairwell like someone out of a movie. As I'm walking, I see the mom at the bottom telling me to hurry up and this and that. While walking through the stairs, the army dad comes running hauling ass to where I'm at. He told me, "Your mom is calling you. It's really important, we gotta go." And basically grabbed me by my wrist, softly, not aggressively, and led me back to our room. He knocked on the door and explained what had happened. I never thought much of it till about a year ago when it came back to me. This woman was leading me away to the beach alone at night, and this army guy got a terrible feeling in his gut, so he intervened. When he said my mom was looking for me, as I don't live with my mom, it set off some alarms in my head. That's when I realized something was up, so I didn't resist going back to my family. As a kid, I knew since he was saying my mom wanted me that it was important. I'm now 20 years old and I truly believe that mom was trying to lure me away to God knows what. And this army dude just had a bad feeling and he saved my life. Thinking back, I get such a bad feeling all through my body. I know now I wouldn't have made it back from that motel. Thank you, army guy. Your gut feeling and having a watchful eye saved something terrible from happening. That woman was creepy, and I never saw her kids. So, about 6 months ago when I was a college sophomore, I ordered a Lyft to pick me up from campus and take me to the DMV. I was supposed to fill out some paperwork for my first car that I just purchased, but wasn't legal for me to drive yet. I wasted about an hour in line only for them to tell me that I'd go to the DMV that was in the county of my permanent residence. Unfortunately enough, after I left the DMV, there wasn't any Wi-Fi for me to order a Lyft back to campus. I tried to go to several gas stations, but they said that their Wi-Fi was unavailable to me. I wondered what they needed private Wi-Fi for. I couldn't get a hold of anyone who could give me a ride. So, I decided to take a 7-mile walk back with a knee that I had scraped just a few days before. After walking a few blocks, I walked past a motel parking lot, and a man sitting in his car started to talk to me. He offered me a ride after I told him where I was going and what had happened to my leg. Now, throughout all my life I was told not to take rides from strangers, but I was hurting and I was also going through a bout of depression at the time, and was previously dumped, and I thought to myself, I don't really care what happens to me anymore. After I got in his car, he started to make small talk. He asked about my major, my age, and my relationship status. After I told him that I was 19 and single, he asked me on a date and I said no. This man was at least twice my age and had poor personal hygiene. I was also crushing hard on my best friend at the time, but he would only turn me down. After I turned the driver down, he invited me to go drinking with him. I told him the truth, that I was underage and not really interested in alcohol at the time. He replied that it was refreshing to see such an honest woman and that girls he had known had lied all the time about their age in order to drink. He told me how pretty he thought it was and he wouldn't stop looking at me during the car ride. He then offered to take me back to his motel to hang out. I told him that I was working on 3 essays that desperately required my attention, which wasn't exactly a lie. I wanted to leave so badly, but I was afraid of what he would do if I told him to let me out of the car. I refused to make eye contact. When we finally arrived at my campus, he kept the doors locked and said that he would pay me $120 to let him see my room, and I flat out said no, I'm not that kind of girl. I felt thoroughly creeped out and insulted. I was wearing a dress and a sweater jacket over it for Christ's sakes, and the only makeup I wore was lipstick. And then he offered me $200 instead, and I said no still. After an uncomfortable silence, he unlocked the doors and tried to give me his phone number. I didn't listen and I bolted from my dorm. I watched him from the blinds in my room that showed the parking area. I didn't do anything until he left. I'm just thankful that I didn't end up back in that motel room. I have a reputation among my friends that if you go out with me, it's gonna be an adventure because of the amount of strange people. It's probably why I work in the mental health field. I preface this because I might post a few more. My friend and I were both starting to get into fitness and wanted to go trail running. Part of it was the exploration too. We have many forested areas where we live, and even though we live in a city, when you get into the forest, you don't hear the sounds of the city any longer, and it's actually pretty easy to get lost. The trails that we want to run are pretty neat. It's like a big bowl in the middle of the city. So, when you enter the bowl, you run steeply down and plateau a bit with some ups and downs. When you get to a bridge, walk across the bog and start slowly climbing up. Then you have choices to keep climbing up and go left, or go right and begin a second descent and then up once more. So, we do our running. We entered the bowl and we arrived at the bridge about an hour in. We stopped and looked at the bog around us because it's pretty cool looking with petrified trees and such. Obviously, we take some pictures and start our ascent upwards. It rained pretty much all day the day before, with a trickle here and there today, so the trails were muddy and we were muddy up to our shins. After about 10 minutes, we arrived at the fork in the trail that takes us up and right or down and left. Being adventurous, we really wanted to try going downwards because it looked really cool. The trail goes and zigzags down pretty steep, so when you're standing at the top, it looks otherworldly and a little ominous. My friend was reading a sign that shows us where we are, and I'm peering off into the even denser forest area that we are about to enter. As my friend walks up behind me, I suddenly just said, "Stop." I can't tell you why I said it immediately. Something compelled me to stop and stand there. I felt uneasy, so I started to stare hard at everything around the trail. My eyes settled on something very odd. A pair of clean, white running shoes. But what was so odd was that they were attached to legs, and the legs had to be attached to a body. I couldn't see over the zigzags of the trail enough to see a full person, but if it was a person, they were laying down on their side in the fetal position. It also caught my attention that these shoes were clean, like they hadn't even touched the mud on the trails. So, I'll point out here that I've taken these fancy word tests that are supposed to tell you your top 5 traits and etc. My top 1 is that I'm pretty prone to taking seemingly random pieces of information and finding a way to relate them. So, a million things are running through my head, and I'm thinking, is it a body? A dead body? A live one? Is it some kind of ruse to get people to come see if the person is okay, and then they murder or they kidnap the person? Is this a fake pair of shoes and the pants are stuffed? Why would someone do that? I'm coming up with all sorts of stuff in my head, and I can tell you that I am not okay by now. And I'm always calm, so my friend is now freaked out. I looked at her and said, "We gotta get out of here now." We turned the opposite direction of the dense forest towards the uphill trail that leads out. I'm always way more out of shape than her, so she has to run away ahead of me and kept waiting for me to catch up. I yell at her to go on without me, and if I get murdered, to go for help so they can catch the killers. It's very dramatic, I know. Finally, we made it to the edge of the trail. Another difference between me and my friend is that she is the type of person to walk away from a situation like this and let it be. I am literally the opposite, and want to involve whoever I think should be. So, after arguing, I called the police to tell them that there is some kind of body laying in the forest. Police arrived fairly quick, so I explained to them where we saw the body, and the officer thanked me for getting his daily exercise in, and goes jogging off into the forest. About 15 minutes later, he emerges. We are all intensely waiting to hear what has happened. The officer says that there is indeed a body there, a live one. The person apparently had gotten so drunk that they somehow made their way into the center of the trail and decided that it was the best spot for them to lay down. The person was making their way out of the forest on their own time, after the officer deemed them able. I looked at the officer and I took him at his word, and we walked away. But I started thinking that it doesn't completely make sense. Maybe I'm just paranoid. Regardless, live drunk person or mysterious dead body, you freaked out 2 young girls, so let's not meet. This story takes place in late 2009. As a young kid, my friend and I would spend all summer exploring the surrounding areas in our small New England town. We would spend all day just exploring anything and everything that we could find. One day, my father told us about an abandoned restaurant deep in the woods. My father told us a story about when he was our age in the early 70s, that the restaurant was owned by the local mafia, and that the group was under investigation at the time for some local people that went missing. The rumor around town was that the mafia had killed the missing people and dumped the bodies in the quarry that was in the back of the restaurant. This was never proven, but it was never disproven too. After hearing this story, it made my friend and I want to find this location more than ever. By the time we went looking for the location, it had been long closed and most of the records had been lost to time. The rest of the summer, it was our goal to find this location. And then on a still September evening, we found the location. At the time, we had such a rush that we finally found the location that we had been looking for. We had about 2 hours left of the sun, so we decided to do as much exploring as we could for the day. We started to walk around the outside of the area, which had been almost fully taken by nature. And when we finally got to the main building, it was still in decent shape for being unused for 20 plus years. After a little while of exploring the outside of the building, we found a way in the inside through a broken door. We took out our old flip phones and used these screens as a small light. At this point, we had about an hour of sunlight left and it was soon to be dark. So we walked around the upper part of the restaurant, and all of a sudden, we heard a noise that broke the quiet, still air. I looked at my friend and in a low voice I asked him if he had heard that. He shook his head and mouthed the word, yes. At this point, we thought it was an animal, so we kept exploring. We finally got to the lower part of the restaurant, and as we walked down the steps, we heard another noise much like the first one that we had heard. At this point, my friend was freaking out and was pulling on my arm to head out of the building. Right as I turned my head to look at him, I caught a black object that darted from one side of the hall to the other, At that point, I was freaked out and wanted to get the heck out of that place as quickly as I could. At this point, we were hauling it up the steps and running as fast as we can to the broken door. The sun had mostly fell beyond the trees as we made it out of the building. I swear we didn't stop running for what felt like miles, and when we felt like we had gotten far enough away, we stopped. And gasping for breath, we turned and looked at each other, and he had a look in his eyes that said it all. We had no idea if what we saw was real or just made up in our mind. And we walked back to my house. By the time we got back, it was around 9 p.m. We talked about what we saw and made a plan to head back the next day during the morning and see if we could find out if it was real or not. The next morning, my friend and I made the hour or so walk back to the building. The first thing we did when we got back to the building was to go and look in the area that we had been the night before. We entered the building as quietly as we could. We got to the lower part and looked in the area that I saw the black figure. We went into the room I had seen the black mass in, and on the floor, it was a mess of old bedding and nasty-looking shirts and pants, but no person. After seeing this, we felt very unnerved and wanted to leave again. We left the building and decided to try and find the quarry my dad had told us about. It took about 10 minutes to find it, but we did. We wanted to walk around the outside of the huge rock face. We got about halfway around the huge circle when we heard some sounds that sounded like heavy footsteps, no more than 20 feet away from us. And before we could figure out what was happening, a huge and nasty-looking man in his late 40s with long light-colored hair jumped out and tackled my friend. I started to kick and punch the man, trying to get him off of my friend. After what felt like an eternity, the man got up and pulled out a large hunting knife from his pants. In this moment, I pulled my friend up and we ran as fast as we could to get away from the old man. We sprinted like we did the night before, but this time, we knew what we saw was real. We got back to my house in about half the time that it normally takes. When we got back, we locked the door and fell to the floor in scared and a shocked mood. My friend wanted for me to call my dad and tell him what we had just went through. At the time, I was scared and so out of it that I didn't know what to do. We waited until both of my parents got home to tell them what took place. We told them the story from the night before and what took place today. After telling them, I could tell they didn't fully think what we were telling them was true. My friend and I went to my room and got upset that my parents didn't believe us. We tried to get over it and tried to move on. Later that night, my friend and I were sitting in the living room playing a video game at about 11 p.m. We had started to move on from the events of the day, when all of a sudden, we saw the backyard light turn on, and we got scared and had a flashback to the events of the day. I built up the nerve to go to the back door and look outside. I noticed that my shed door was cracked open, and I knew for a fact that we always kept it shut. I ran to my parents' room and shook my dad to get him up and to see what was going on outside. Annoyed that I woke him up, he soon agreed and walked down and saw what we were talking about and wanted to take a look and see what was outside. He cracked the door and slowly walked to the shed. My dad got about 5 feet away from the shed when an older man ran out of the shed and ran into the woods in the back of the house. My dad ran to the house and told me to call the cops. I did, and within 5 minutes, the police showed up. I had to tell my story of what took place at the abandoned building in the woods. After my testimony, they went and took a look in the shed and found a large hunting knife on the floor. The police took it and told my parents that they would have the cops in the area looking for the man. A week passes and the police had not caught the man or had any new information, so we started to move on again. Fast forward about 8 years later, my friend and I are now in college. I was calling my mom one day and she said that she had a story that she needed to send me. What she sent was a story of a local man who had gone missing a week ago while hiking in the woods that surrounded my town. The man was found dead in the same building many years ago that I had encountered with the old man. I'm not saying that he had anything to do with it. but it definitely seems like a strong connection. At the time of me writing this, they had never found the person who had killed the man in the building. To the old man in the woods, I hope I never see you again. So, to begin, this event took place in the summer of 2019 in England, more specifically the Midlands. At this time of the story, I was 15, a male, and was with 3 other friends, all 15 and also male. Me and 3 friends who I'll call James, Brad, and Ryan for the purpose of the story, were bored with nothing to do. Most of our friends had long gone inside and the time was probably around 6 or 7 p.m. We were near a small stretch of woods that was near a road and had a nice path to walk along with the stream. After walking and conversing for maybe 10 minutes, we stopped at a bench to rest and just play some music and enjoy the last of the heat as the night began to draw in. Not like dark, but just around the time before sunset, when the sky gets the nice orange hue. After sitting and chatting for maybe 15 minutes, with no sign of anyone else on the short trail, an old couple comes walking past us. The woman had a long skirt on, down to her shoes, and one of those old woman's hats from the 40s. I can't remember anything distinctive about her face, except that she seemed maybe around 60 or 70 at most, and very gray and dull in looks. The man seemed slightly older than the woman, a cream shirt on, old jeans and work boots, and a cane in one hand. They had their arms interlocked and seemed at most ordinary apart from the clothing, and such which seemed quite dated. We were sat on a small bench that could fit 3 people maximum, and therefore me, Ryan, and Brad sat on the bench, with James on the opposite side of the path, sat on the floor facing us. Now, just to point out which becomes somewhat important soon, Brad is of Indian descent, and the rest of us were white British. As the couple were to pass through us, James had to bring his legs in to let them pass. However, the man seemed somewhat mad about this and almost scoffed as he walked by James. Understandably, James was confused and a little offended by this, and in a half-assertive, half-joking way said, "Alright mate, no need for that." The couple seemed to ignore it and carried on down the hill. Now, this is where things get creepy. We brushed this off as an old man grumpy at the world, trying to seem the hero to his wife, and expected him to just move along, but this did not happen. As they reached the bottom of the hill, his head did almost a full 90-degree quick snap to face us, and with the most menacing look in his face, charged up the hill. Now, the strangest part is a full 60 seconds had at least passed, and now he was upset. It made no sense, like all of a sudden my friend's remark had clicked in his brain. He also dropped his cane, much to his wife's despair, and walked almost double his previous speed uphill. We were truly baffled, and maybe expected a stern talking to, and to an extent, that's what we got from him, at least the usual old man stuff. "You kids have no respect. And you should watch out. You don't know us, I have grandkids your ages," etc. And as quickly as he said all of this, he walked back down the hill, retrieved the cane, and began staring at us from the bottom of the hill alongside his wife. And then this is where things took a drastic turn. The man then stood there, almost huffing and puffing like an angry toddler, and his wife saw this as her turn to make the approach, as he stood. For the whole time after this, by the way, staring at us, not blinking, barely moving, just staring. His wife made her way back up the incline and began speaking to us. She seemed even more delusional and even incoherent in the way that she acted and spoke. Most of the stuff was the same as her husband, until she took a huge interest in Brad. Remember how I said he was of Indian descent? She looked him dead in the eyes and said, "You're different to all of these, aren't you?" With an almost evil half grin. Brad was taken aback and said, "I'm sorry, isn't that racist?" She shot back almost instantly with a, "Oh, no, no, no. I just mean you're different. You're the chosen one." I know, weird and almost cliche sounding, right? At this point, we were all shocked and began shooting each other concerned and confused half glances. and then she began waving into the trees behind the bench, where us three were sitting, her eyes frantically darting from point to point, and waving almost methodically in motion as she exclaimed loudly and almost proudly, "It's okay, you don't need to watch them anymore. It's fine, you don't need to come out now, you can stay there." At this, we all turned around rapidly to see no one or nothing behind us, and at that, she shot Brad one more deep stare and started on her walk again. The old man had been staring the whole time. They met at the bottom of the hill, interlocked arms, and turned the corner. We were all feeling all types of emotions now and really didn't know what to do. The woods on either side of the path were thick. So thick, in fact, even teens couldn't enter it alone. So, there was only one place they could have gone, which was follow the path. Ryan had the smart idea to see where they went, so no less than 20 seconds after they rounded the corner, we followed at an almost running walk speed, and got to the end of the trail, but there was no sign of them. At the end of the trail led to 3 directions left, into an alley and a shop with a dead end, right onto the start of a busy road with nothing to see, and straight into a cul-de-sac that also had a dead end right at the bottom. Me and Brad went straight, Ryan went left, and James went right, but you guessed it, they were gone. How? We met up in disbelief and shock and confusion and everything in between. The sun was now pulling in, and we needed to make our way home, and therefore, that's what we did. And on the way home, which was at least a 20 to 30 minute walk, we were half paranoid we would see them again, but not really flustered. It's now been like half a year, and we had all forgotten about these people and never seen them again. But after reading similar stories and listening to that on YouTube, it reminded me of that evening, and I thought that everybody would like to hear it. This story happened to me over 20 years ago, back in the summer of 1992. It was the summer between my first and second year of college, and I was working that summer on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. My father worked for the Park Service at the time and could pull some strings and get my siblings and I jobs working in restaurants at national parks around the country. That summer, I went to work at the Bright Angel Lodge on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. First, some backstory as to what was going on in Arizona at the time. From 1990 to 1991, a man named Danny Ray Horning went on a bank robbing spree across the western United States that ended up with him getting arrested in Arizona in 1991. He was basically given a life sentence and put in prison near Phoenix, Arizona. He was also wanted in California for murder, but since he had basically a life sentence in Arizona, they decided not to extradite him there. In 1992, Horning put on a doctor's coat he found at the prison and basically walked right out of it. He then proceeded to disappear with authorities having no idea where he went. The first reported sighting of him was when he kidnapped a couple in Flagstaff, Arizona, and they drove to the Grand Canyon. After arriving in the Grand Canyon, Danny Ray tried to kidnap a family, and that went wrong and he ended up getting into a high-speed chase and shootout with the Park Service police before ditching the car and fleeing into the woods. Danny had been in the military and had received survival training, so he knew how to survive off of the land. At any rate, he eluded the police for the next month and a half by hiding out in the surrounding forest. Some 400 state and federal agents descended on the area to search for him. This made life interesting while living in the park. Helicopters would fly over the forest looking for him, and agents would patrol the area with assault rifles and canines. If you wanted to leave the park, you usually had to go through 3 police checkpoints. At one point, he was spotted in the area of my employee dorm, so they brought police with canines to search each room. The restaurant that I worked at had a huge kitchen and a long hallway on one end leading out the back. At the back of the hallway were the walk-in coolers. With my hours, I would get off work at 2:30 a.m., and at this time, there would only be 2 other dishwashers and myself as well, as another man who would come in to start prepping for breakfast. The kitchen was massive, and there was hardly anywhere to notice if anyone else walked in the back hallway. The manager and cooks noticed some things were missing from the walk-in coolers at one point. Then they checked surveillance video and saw someone who appeared to be Danny Ray sneaking in and going into one of the walk-in coolers and getting food and then leaving. Even with all of this going on, I just kind of kept about my business and didn't really think I would have a run-in with him or anything. I also didn't really have access to a TV or read the papers much, so I didn't know much about what was going on with the whole situation, other than by word of mouth. In these jobs, you would usually start out working in the kitchen as a dishwasher, or in the restaurant as a busser. I started out as a dishwasher and worked the evening shift starting at 6 p.m. and ended at 2:30 a.m. When I would get off work at 2:30, I would have to walk back to the employee housing because the public shuttle had stopped running hours before. The employee housing was about 2 miles from the restaurant, and I had two options on how I could walk there. The first was to walk along the main road through the park that took you past the visitor center and then by the general store. It wasn't very pretty as it was just a dirt path, basically alongside the road, but it was a bit safer as it was patrolled by park rangers. The second option was to walk along the Grand Canyon Rim Trail for about a mile before connecting up with another trail that would take you up through the woods and dump you out at the visitor center along the main road. This option was much prettier, as you would walk along the edge of the Grand Canyon in the forest, but it was also somewhat scary because it was pitch black out with no light unless the moon was out. I liked to walk this route because it was so beautiful with the stars looking so bright, and also the big empty black void of the canyon right next to you. Going this way also made me nervous because I had heard about there being mountain lions in the park, and also who knows what kind of person I might run into out for a late night stroll along the canyon. That night, I decided to walk along the rim trail, as I had my flashlight with me. I made it along the rim trail without incident, and connected with the trail that cuts over to the visitor center. The trail is a little scary, as it cuts through pretty thick woods for about half a mile before arriving at the visitor center. This trail is usually pitch black at this time of night, with not even moonlight penetrating through the thick trees. I walked the trail until I was almost at the visitor center, and remembered that behind the visitor center is an amphitheater, and I had never seen it before, so I wanted to go to it to see what it looked like, even though it was now about 3 a.m. and pitch black out. The amphitheater is a short walk through the woods before you arrive at it. I walked over to it and walked around it and up onto the stage, and the whole time shining my flashlight around to get a look at it. It's kind of a crude amphitheater with just basically an elevated platform surrounded by benches, and with the forest surrounding the whole thing. I was shining my flashlights around the area, when suddenly I hear rustling in the surrounding trees. I get a little nervous knowing that it's not the wind as there is no wind that night, and think that it might be an animal or something. I hear it again, so I shine my flashlight out into the forest to see if I see anything. I stepped off the stage and I walk in the direction that I heard it coming from, while shining my flashlight around through the trees. At this point, I was past all the benches of the amphitheater and entering the surrounding forest. I hear the rustling again. It was getting louder, so I knew I was getting closer to it. Now, I grew up in the mountains of Colorado and have come across animals in the woods before. When they make noise, it is usually pretty constant, such as when they are moving around and you might hear twigs breaking or such, but this time, I wasn't hearing that. These were much more controlled, rustling noises that would happen every couple of minutes. I keep walking further into the forest and shining my flashlight, when suddenly, I briefly see something shining through the trees. I walk towards it and get closer to it, and I see what looks like a large bag laying on the forest floor. I keep walking towards it, and all of a sudden, see it rustle as if something is inside or underneath it. Finally, I'm only about 5 or 6 feet from it. I see that it is several feet long and shiny on the outside. I keep my flashlight on it, and at this point, I'm just inching towards it. I have to know what's inside of it. All of a sudden, the bag rolls towards me, and a face pops out of it. I shine my flashlight in the face for a second, and it's at this point that I realize that it's someone sleeping out here in the woods wrapped up in a blanket, and what looks like a thermal blanket on top of it. They must just be camping out here. The face is of a man, and he has reddish blonde hair and a mustache. His eyes are still closed, so it looks like he's sleeping. Behind the bag, I see a backpack. I quickly shut off my flashlight so as to not wake him if he's sleeping, and start slowly backing up. I get all the way back to the trail, continuing to hear the rustling occasionally the whole time. And then I walk the main trail up past the visitor center, and eventually get back to the housing without incident, but somewhat spooked the whole time and constantly checking to make sure that I'm not being followed. I was somewhat spooked by this the next couple of days, but then I realized that it wasn't that unusual to see people sleeping in their cars or campers in the parking lots, or maybe even out in the woods in a tent, though it is against the park rules, because they would arrive late at the park or just didn't want to pay the high hotel rates. What did strike me as weird was that when I had seen people camping before, they were usually close to their car and would have a tent or other gear with them. This situation seemed weird because this guy had only had his backpack and just looked like a blanket is all. Also, the nearest parking lot was at the visitor center, and I didn't see any cars there that night. At any rate, I just kind of shrugged it off. I even walked by the spot the next day and didn't see anything or any evidence that he was there. This happened just a few days after it was made official that Danny Ray Horning had entered the park, but I hadn't seen what he looked like yet. This was also long before the park became overran with authorities searching for him. And then one day I happened to see a wanted picture of him, and was shocked to see that he had blonde hair and a mustache. The wanted notice also said that he was last seen with reddish blonde hair after recently dyeing it. I'm pretty certain that that was the man that I saw that night. Maybe he was asleep. Maybe he was just pretending to be. I'll never know. Even though he never hurt any civilians during his escape, he did kidnap several to use as hostages, so who knows what he would have done. At any rate, he was eventually caught after he kidnapped 2 women and forced them to drive out of the park. He managed to drive through 2 police roadblocks after the police failed to recognize him and wave them on. He then tied the woman to a tree near Sedona and fled in their car. The woman escaped and called police, who then spotted the car, and another high-speed chase and shootout happened, before he fled again into the woods. The next morning, a man spotted him in his backyard, drinking from his hose, and called the police, who searched the area but couldn't find him. The next morning, a policeman went back to that house to research it, and found him sleeping under their gazebo and arrested him. He was also extradited back to California, and tried for the earlier murder, and today he is currently sitting on death row in San Quentin prison. My husband and I live not too far from a state park that we've been going to lately for walks in the afternoon. Yesterday was a really awesome day. The weather was perfect and we felt great about getting our walk in. We're trying to lose some weight. The park is pretty spread out, so by the time we get halfway through, we're pretty far from our vehicle. We're laughing and having a good time when a car pulls alongside us and just stares at the stroller that I'm pushing with my newborn son inside. My husband and I think it's super creepy and move along quickly, and the car makes leave. We get across this bridge to another parking lot to discover the same car is parked by the trail that we were taking. When we get somewhat close, 2 guys with little dogs get out and go in separate directions, and one sits in the driver's seat with the car running. We don't like this, but also know that we tend to be pretty paranoid. My husband is 6'5" and huge. Who would willingly mess with him? The car stays put, much to our relief, and we make it to the end in about an hour. All is fine and dandy until we come back through and find the same car. It's a different parking lot. The 2 guys are out again walking their tiny dogs. These guys are about late 40s to early 50s, look pretty rough and are staring directly at us. They jump in the car and they head our way. And by this time, we're super paranoid. I grab my husband and we sit at a conveniently placed picnic table that is right off the road to wait them out. They just sit there at the stop sign facing us for about 2 minutes, until another car comes and forces them to move. Those 2 minutes felt like hours. We book it out of there with a death grip on the stroller. We get back over the bridge and guess who was sitting there? Yep, the same guys. We keep walking like we didn't notice, and my husband gets the license plate number, the make and the model of the car. My husband has had enough now. We make it to the store restaurant that is halfway through the park and go inside and call the police. I sit out front because my son is all fussy and I don't want him bothering anyone. My husband was only gone for a moment to grab an employee, maybe a minute, and I was in clear view. The people wouldn't even have had time to get to us. Anyway, cell reception is pretty much non-existent there. So my husband goes back inside and 2 of the employees, they were really nice, came out to sit with me. The creepers, all 3 this time, got out with their dogs and started walking around while keeping their distance, but still within eyeshot of me. The sheriff says to wait there, so we sit out front with one of the employees, watching the creepers watch us. I think they got nervous with everyone around, so they drove across the road to another building there. They parked to where their car was facing directly at us. After about 30 minutes or so, the sheriff pulls in and they zoom out there as fast as they can. One of the employees comes out to talk to the sheriff and say that he was watching the car from inside the store, and one of the guys was standing behind their car watching us the whole time. We just couldn't see him from where we were. The sheriff takes off looking for them, but I doubt he found them because that place is amazing. They went out the back way. In a way, I'm happy this happened to us instead of someone less paranoid. I have family members that take their kids up there all the time. I highly doubt that they would even notice someone following them. This whole ordeal lasted around 2 to 2.5 hours. I was so relieved to get my baby boy home. Things could have gone an entirely different way today. What started out as a simple walk on a nice day turned into a stalking and could have ended so badly. My husband and I thank the sheriff and the store's employees profusely. I hate to think about what could have happened had they not been there or been so kind. The world is a crazy place. Be safe out there and keep your children, family, and friends close. I was camping in the middle of nowhere in Washington near Mount Ray International Park. It technically wasn't an official campground, just way out in the forest where I wouldn't have expected another human for miles. One night I wake up and I hear something open my tent, and there's a guy sitting by where my fire had been right outside my tent. Nothing particularly noteworthy about the guy. Just a fairly regular looking dude, just sitting there a couple feet from my tent. No bag or pack or anything on him, just a guy. He saw me open the tent. His eyes got huge like he had just seen a ghost, and he took off. It shook me up pretty badly, but over the next day, I managed to put it out of my mind fairly well after writing it off as just some odd occurrence, and a guy that was probably high on something, and did somehow manage to set up a camp coincidentally not far from mine. And then 2 days after that, and 10 to 15 miles away in a totally random directions that nobody could take the same path as on accident, I was sitting by the fire that night, and started hearing noises that I got more and more convinced were a person. I called out to them, and out of the darkness, someone was like, "Do you know how to get to Bell's Canyon?" I said no. I don't even think that's a real place there. They kept talking from just out of my line of vision. I tried to see them with my flashlight, but they yelled, "Aim that away!" And kind of spooked and not wanting to piss off a potentially crazy person, I did. After like 15 minutes of me being very freaked out, and them talking and asking completely random questions from the darkness, it sounded like the voice had gotten closer, so I shined my light that way again. And it was the same dude who had been outside my tent 2 nights before. He had to have followed me almost 15 miles over 2 days, because there is no way he could have accidentally wound up in the same spot as vast as that wilderness is. No possible way. As soon as my light hit him, he took off again. I started to chase him, but I didn't want to get lost in the wilderness in the dark, so I stopped quickly after probably only 100 or 200 feet. This one couldn't be written off, because the only way he could have been in both places is specifically if he was following me. I decided that the trip was very over first thing in the morning, and I hiked back out over 3 days, constantly doubling back, trying to throw anyone following me off my trail, and occasionally hiding and waiting to see if he would come by following me. I really can't describe how terrifying it was to feel like I was being hunted through the woods, and to actually have to brainstorm on things that I could do to best avoid potentially being murdered. On the first night of hiking out, twice I heard what sounded like a person walking circles outside my tent, but by the time I mustered the courage to look, nobody was there. On the second night, I heard what I thought was an animal making noises, at first in the distance, but slowly decided it sounded more like a human making animal calls. It could have actually been an animal, but I didn't actually see the guy again. It really sounded like a person making howling noises. I literally almost cried when I finally got back to my car. The relief was so strong. To this day, it's probably the most terrifying experience I've ever had. I have no idea who the guy was or what his intentions were, and no way of getting an explanation, but I really can't articulate just what a terrifying few days it was. This story happened slightly over 20 years ago, back when I was 16. And during this time, I lived with my mom and stepdad in a remote area 70 miles west of Las Vegas. I had gone out to visit with my friends, being allowed to drive myself for the first time ever. I had a lovely time watching a movie and getting food together, until it was time for me to head home. The curfew I was given was 10 p.m., with the caveat that if I was running late for any reason, to find a payphone and call. The night wrapped around me in my old 71 Chevy pickup, as there were no street signs or houses for most of my way home. As I pulled up to the first of 2 stop signs, I could see an older sedan. Old cars are still pretty common in that area, stopped with its hazards on. I pulled up behind it and waited as a man, 30 to 40, started walking towards me from the driver's side. Even at this point, I didn't have any alarm bells going off. Being in the middle of the Mojave Desert, providing assistance to stranded people was common. People rapidly get into severe problems there by not having enough water when a vehicle breaks down, or not realizing that it's a desert, and people die wandering deliriously away from the highway trying to find help. Anyhow, I rolled down my window, and as he came abreast of my door, I could smell the liquor on him. I could see another man in the passenger seat. As this was before anyone I knew had cell phones, and the nearest payphone was a good 10 minutes drive ahead, I didn't have a way to call the cops on a drunk driver immediately. The man explained that his car had stalled and asked if I could help him out. I asked if his car was a stick shift, which it was, so I asked him if he was familiar with push starting it. He said yes, so I agreed to, as gently as I could, push the car with my truck while they turned the engine over. For anyone that isn't familiar, this is a way to start a manual car that is having battery or starter issues, specifically to get it somewhere to work on it. I knew my truck would be fine, and I didn't feel like it would be wise to get out and try to push their car physically. Push starting the car worked without a hitch, but here's where things go south. They get back out and thank me, and then invite me to hang out and have some fun with them. I decline. They pull off to the side of the road, and I continue on my way, but they start following me. So here I am, it's 9:50, I'm running late because I stopped to help them. Admittedly, I hadn't given myself much leeway from leaving my friends. These drunk, creepy older guys have started to follow me on a road without any man-made light, except for car headlights, and I'm at least 10 minutes from a payphone. I think to myself, maybe I'm being paranoid, so I turned down a road that I know gave a couple of turnoffs to either head back to town or loop around to the gas station with a payphone. The car follows behind me. I'm thinking, crap. I'd take another turn that only leads to a couple houses at the end of the road, and they turn behind me. I'd take another turn to loop around back to the gas station, and they follow me again, so at least I know they're following me and not just heading home. At this point, my heart is pounding. I decided to try something to lose them. I pull to the side of the road. I see them pull up behind me. I wait as the driver gets out of his car and begins walking towards me. His companion also gets out and starts walking towards me. I wait until they almost get to my tailgate and then I floor it. My wheels dig into the rocks and poof dirt, causing a cloud behind me. With the leadway, I head towards the gas station. The gas station is deserted, but the payphone is showered in the light from the gas pumps. I call home and explain what happened and why I was running late. My stepdad asked if the gas station worker could be seen, and I let him know that I couldn't see him behind the counter because he was probably in the back. I wasn't in trouble, but I was asked to hurry home. So, to the two drunk idiots that wanted to mess with 16-year-old me on my first night driving by myself, let's not meet again. I leave for work around 6 a.m. every morning. I live in a tiny town in Texas, so small we don't even have police. Nothing ever happens here. Until this morning. I left as they usually do, and the road I take out of town is a dirt road with no lighting. I usually don't see other vehicles, especially not behind me. This morning as I left, I noticed a car down the street with its running lights on. But I didn't think much of it, until there is a vehicle behind me gaining on me with ridiculous speed for all the potholes on this dirt road. And then I realized the driver was trying to pass me. I have a healthy dose of paranoia, so this situation already had me on edge, and something in me said, don't let them get in front of you. So I didn't stop at the stop sign. The other driver proceeded to gun it around me anyway since I had reduced my speed, but since I never stopped, they couldn't cut me off completely. They then stopped in the middle of the road. I found myself pulling around the suspicious driver on the right, half off the road, and rolling down my window to ask if everything was okay. And that's when I noticed that the person in question had put the vehicle in park. They were halfway out of the driver's side door by the time I got around the front side of the vehicle, and our eyes met. I felt a moment of terror, realizing that if I stayed put, something bad would happen. I floored it and swerved around the front of the vehicle, crashing through numerous potholes to reach the highway. It was only a little ways off. He stayed on my bumper until I jumped into traffic, after which he stopped following and I called the county sheriff. They sent somebody to patrol, but it's doubtful that they'll find anyone. I drive a Nissan truck and the other driver was an older Tahoe or some similar SUV. I'm so shaken up that I called into work. I read that this happens all the time and I have thought, my life's so boring and I'll never have a post to contribute. But here I am. I had to write it all out because these scenes keep playing over and over in my head. Watching those headlights accelerate towards me. The fear I felt when they tried to start passing me or run me off the road. It was the scariest moment of my life when I looked into that man's eyes, like I could feel his intentions were to do me harm. Suddenly, I'm thankful for my boring life. So whoever you were this morning, let's not ever meet. Long-time lurker here, first time posting. I guess this isn't exactly something that happened directly to me, but something odd that I witnessed. This happened during the summer of 2017. Every weekday, I would wake up early, around 5 a.m. for a morning workout, and then head to my job. Generally, I would leave my house around 5:30, because my morning drive took around 25 to 30 minutes, giving me enough time for 2 hours before I needed to leave before my shift started. Most of my drive was just me putting loud music on, trying not to fall asleep, and it being the freeway before 6 a.m. Almost everyone was going at least 10 miles over the speed limit. I would drive most of the time on a main interstate before turning off onto a smaller highway, which I only used for a mile or so. This highway was 3 lanes on each side. People always drive fast on here, but usually not more than 75 miles per hour or more. And while you get some unsafe drivers in the morning, most people aren't swerving erratically. This highway runs north to south. An on-ramp from a main street becomes a lane, and then there are 2 entrances from the freeway that I would take every day. One from the eastbound side and one from the westbound side. I hope that makes sense, but basically, I got on from the eastbound side right as 3 cars from the westbound side are entering. One was some sort of orange sporty-ish car, and the other 2 were identical dark gray sedans. I don't remember exactly what make or model they were, but I remember them being fairly uncommon models. Not a sedan you would see 100 times a day. One was in front of this orange car, one behind. These guys were going at least 80 miles per hour. The orange car would change lanes, and the car in front would cut him off while the one behind him would change lanes to remain behind him. And they kept this up for the entire time that I was on the highway near them, weaving in and out of cars, not slowing down before I pulled off of my exit. This could be a complete coincidence and some asshole drivers, but I definitely got the vibe that the driver of the orange car was trying to get away from the gray cars. Maybe it was extreme road rage, or maybe something more sinister. Regardless, I'll never know. So, drivers of those gray cars, let's not meet. Okay, so this could have been nothing, but something about it felt so off. Some backstory. So last night, my sister, who lives 3 hours away from me, had somewhat of an emergency, and asked if I would come stay the night with her. I packed my bags right away, and headed there at 9 p.m. As I was about an hour away from my apartment, I realized that my car wasn't going to make it. The temperature gauge was rising, and I didn't want to risk it overheating in the middle of nowhere. So I turned around, and when I'm about 15 minutes from home, my car overheats. At this point, it's about 11:30 p.m. I pull off at an exit and wait for it to cool down, and then got back on the highway, but it did it again. So I pulled off onto the side of the highway. As I'm waiting for it to cool down, I tried to start it again, and it wouldn't start at all. I'm a 23-year-old female, all alone, new to town, and my boyfriend was out of town, so I start to panic a little because I read so many damn Reddit stories. I managed to calm down, and called my stepdad to let him know where I was and that I was going to call a tow truck. As I was on the phone with him, 2 cars pull off the highway right in front of me, and then one right behind me. My first thought was that they were going to help me, that they were all traveling together and needed to stop. But it was really weird that they pulled off at the same spot that I did, with one pulling in behind me. They all sat in their cars for what felt like forever, but was probably around 3 minutes. And then a man got out of one of the cars in front of me and started walking towards my car. He walked to the passenger side, stopped for 1 second, and then walked to the car behind me. This whole time, I'm describing what he looks like to my stepdad, just in case. He was then in that car for a while and walked back towards my car. And as he was passing my window, hit it with his knuckle, knocking once, and he kept walking. They then sat there for a while and then all left at once. I'm realizing as I'm typing this that it doesn't seem that weird. But being alone on the highway with 3 cars pulled off in front of you and behind you is a suffocating feeling. And I really don't understand why he felt the need to knock on my window as he was walking by. I'm not going to lie. It made me cry because it was just so bizarre. I'm hoping they were just pulled off to talk to each other and I was just overreacting. But regardless, let's not meet. This story takes place last April. I was a senior in high school. I lived my whole life in the Midwest, so I was always eager for spring break when I would vacation to somewhere more interesting. This year, I was going to Oregon with my friend Mary. Mary was 3 years older than me and dating my best friend Josh, who was attending the University of Oregon. She happened to be moving there the week of my spring break, so it was perfect for me to ride along. We set off on our journey on Friday night at 10:30 p.m. I know it's a weird time to leave, but it was nice to get through Chicago in the middle of the night to escape traffic. We spent most of Saturday driving through flat, boring farmland. We got to see the Badlands National Park, which was pretty cool, especially after such a boring day. At around 11 that night, we were both exhausted, so we called and booked a hotel in Montana, about 3 hours away. We were starting to enter the section of this part of the country that was pretty much just a ton of Native American reserves, when we turned down a long, beat-up road. Only one other car was on the road, and it was a large white truck that had been behind us for a while. We drove on this road for a few miles before this car started riding our ass. We slowed down to let him pass and he floored it. Again, us being exhausted, we saw this as an opportunity to get to our hotel faster. We figured it was a local that knew that he could speed without any trouble, so we sped down the road just a few miles per hour less than him to make our trip shorter. We came to a stop and he turned left, which we also happened to be doing. He pulled into a parking lot for a bar that was just on the corner as we continued, but he didn't park. He just waited, and as we passed, he pulled out behind us. Now, I'm a very paranoid person, so I told Mary that I thought he was following us, but she reassured me that he probably just didn't want us behind him, because some people are like that. I agreed and we kept on. I was still nervous, but I watched him turn off the road and my mind was at ease. Fast forward about half an hour, and Mary's starting to show obvious signs of exhaustion in her demeanor, so I offered to drive the rest of the way. She said, okay, and that she would pull off at the next chance. The problem was, the road we were on didn't connect with any other roads. There were no driveways or stores, or really anything except for wide open plains for miles. She decided to pull off the road to make the switch, but as she started to pull over, a bright set of headlights came up out of nowhere and looked like they were in the back of her car. This guy ran us off the road and we almost crashed. We came to a stop and both looked at each other like, what was that? But before we could say anything, the car from behind pulled off like 15 yards ahead of us, and it was the white truck from before. My heart sank and I said, Mary, don't get out of the car, just keep driving, do not stop. She was obviously weirded out at this point, but wasn't totally convinced that it was all that dangerous. But she saw that I was scared and started to creep back on the road. The guy ahead must have seen us moving as he started to drive too. We stopped again and he drove slowly, about a quarter mile up the road, turned off into a patch of trees and killed his headlights. I told her that I was sure he was following us. We had been driving forever, and what were the odds we had encountered each other again? She called Josh so we could get a third opinion. He was never the type to assume the worst, and he wasn't there. So he told us that it was probably a coincidence and that we should just keep driving and be wary. So we continued on for another 20 minutes without seeing him. But when we passed through another small town, I spotted him. He was sitting at a stop sign on the side of the road facing the road that we were on, with his headlights off. We passed by him. He turned his lights on and started driving again, right on our tail. At this point, Mary was convinced and she immediately called 911. We were in the middle of nowhere though, and her phone kept dropping the call. The dispatcher said they couldn't get a read on our location and asked where we were. But not even the map on my phone would load. We felt like we were dead already. He passed us again and I shouted for Mary to speed up so I could write his plate number down. We got it right before he sped off out of sight. The dispatcher was able to find us and told us to head to the nearest police station, about 20 minutes away. She also told us to not stop driving, and that this guy was a professional at what he was doing. She informed us that his tactic of passing us was so he could know where we were turning and going, so he could always be one step ahead. Fear sank into both of us when we realized that he knew exactly where we were, even when we didn't know where he was. We drove on, with him popping out behind us once more and again speeding off. I got to the police station and I pulled up on my phone and we were almost there. We stopped at the light where we were supposed to turn right, but we hadn't seen this guy in a while and this looked like the perfect road to sneak around on. I didn't tell Mary to turn, she kept driving. She asked me where it was and I felt guilty not telling her, so I told her that we had passed it. And then my phone hadn't loaded the directions until just then. She made a U-turn and we headed back. On the way there, we passed the guy. He was headed the way we were going before turning around, and we don't think that he saw us. We made it to the police station where they were expecting us and they sent cars out to find him. We got a police escort to our hotel, an hour away, and the rest of our trip was as normal as can be. We calculated that he had followed us around 60 to 70 miles. We don't know if he was caught nor do we know what his intentions were, but I still get chills whenever I tell this story, and whenever I see a similar white truck. Remember this story while taking long road trips, and don't forget to always check what's behind you. This story happened to me and my girlfriend, now fiance. To give you some context, she and I met online in 2015 and fell in love. We communicated via Skype for 3 years because we lived in separate countries, until I came to live with her in February of 2018. So, a few weeks or so before I flew to meet her, she had made friends with a group of guys in her hometown, and I got to meet them shortly after living with her. They ranged in age from 16 to 18, and they would come over to visit us very often because we lived close to the high school that they had attended. At first, I found it a bit weird that they would always come over and take up so much of our time, but they turned out to be really good friends over time. One of them even agreed to be one of my groomsmen recently. But back then, there was one in particular that always bugged me. Dan. As I mentioned earlier, the guys would come and visit and hang out with us a lot, but Dan was the one that would always take up most of our time. I say this in the sense that he would message us early almost every day, asking if we were home, and if he could come over, and would proceed to spend almost the entire day, from morning to night or early afternoon to night, depending on his work schedule, at our place. He would also go out of his way to meet us and bump into us wherever we went, whether it was at the store, a coffee shop, or any other place that you could think of. While I found this annoying, there wasn't anything particularly creepy or weird going on yet. Mind you, we live in a small town where it's almost impossible to not run into someone you know on the way to buy groceries or something like that. Plus, I had only known him for about as long as my fiance had known him, which wasn't a very long time, so I thought I maybe was judging him too harshly. Also, he was in a long-distance relationship with a girl from another country, whom he was hoping to meet in real life, just like me. So, I could at least relate to him in that aspect. I decided to let it slide, but made a note to keep an eye out for any suspicious behavior. The problem seemed to start once he also started trying to incorporate himself into other aspects of our life. He would make friends with anyone that we had been friends with for a long time, tag along with us whenever we were going to meet up with said friends, even though he hadn't been invited, hang out with them without us knowing, etc. My favorite instance, and the one that made me become more suspicious with him, was the time when we were going to hang out with some longtime friends of my fiance. As the friend had finished her shift, and we were getting ready to get into her car to drive over to her place, Dan suddenly shows up and joins us to the place uninvited. It was just so off-putting that he would just invite himself over without our friends or even our permission. And then, when we were done there and walking home, the three of us passed his house. We lived further away at the time, and I assumed that he would just go home. But nope. He just kept tagging along with us, with the excuse that he needed to buy something at the store. Which was BS since all the stores had been closed for over an hour, and he knew it. So he kept walking with us until at one point, when we were almost home, we put our foot down and told him that we were tired and just wanted to go to sleep as soon as we got home, and we told him to go home. It took us 10 minutes to convince him, during which he would react to our requests with awkward and creepy silences until he finally headed home, annoyed. My fiance, concerned that she had offended him, asked if he wanted to hang out with us later in the week. What followed was various weeks of him coming over to our place, staying until late at night and him slowly leaving more and more of his stuff at our place, so he would have an excuse to come over. I kid you not, he once brought over his PS3 with a bag of 30 or so games which stayed there for 3 months. It got to the point where people thought that he had moved in with us. He also seemed to have problems with all of our friends. Among other things, he would get into arguments with our friends and told one friend who was goofing around at our place once that he would kill him if he didn't shut up. He lied to us and made us believe that 2 good friends of ours wanted to report us to the police for drugging our friends. I mentioned earlier that some of them were 16 at the time. He allegedly hit one of our friends' girlfriends once. This was never confirmed, but I have no reason to believe that it's a lie. And so on. It was like he wanted us all to himself and to isolate us from our friends. The last thing he did, which ended up being the key to us getting rid of him forever, was that he started dating my fiance's cousin, MJ. He broke up with his long-distance girlfriend under suspicious circumstances and started dating her. As a result, whenever MJ came to visit, Dan would come along as well. My fiance wanted to hang out with MJ, while there was Dan. Even when he was dating someone else, his obsession with us never ended. One day when we were in town, we met another friend of ours and Dan insisted that we hang out with that guy all day, when we had already agreed to do something else. When we refused, he and MJ ditched us to be with him, and that was when we had had enough. We got into a huge fight later that day in a park, with some of our friends as witnesses, and told him off, telling him we wanted nothing to do with him anymore, and to pack up his stuff and never show his face at our place again. This unfortunately resulted in my fiance and MJ not talking to each other for a long time. We had to move a few times since then, the most recent being February of last year, and we never saw him and blocked him on all our social media and blocked him out of our lives. We know from friends that he tried a few times to ask around where we live, but our friends always have our backs and don't tell him. MJ and my fiance recently made up after she dumped him, and now that the sour taste he left behind is for the most part gone, it goes without saying that we never want to see him again. I was born and raised in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I still live on the east side. There is a local public park near my parents' house called McAlpine Creek, which is mainly a large cross-country trail stretching miles across East Charlotte. The park is enveloped by hundreds of acres of dense forest and undeveloped land that is just strictly amidst busy streets and highways. You almost don't realize how big the forest stretches because of the infrastructure around it. There is a myth or folktale about a devil church or Satan church deep within the park. There are a few videos on YouTube and other forum posts around the web of locals attempting to approach it. A simple Google search and you'll find them. In my senior year of high school, scouring the internet about this supposed church, I had somehow found a somewhat vague description of the location from someone who had attempted to go down the roads deep within the park to find it. My girlfriend at the time and I, one Friday night, decided to try to find the road that leads to the church. We drove down the winding roads behind a Carmax that borders the dense woods of the park, where there is a small neighborhood of sorts. I think I had gotten 2 street names that were in close proximity to the spot. Cautiously driving down these quiet and dark roads, we had found a seemingly abandoned dirt track offshooting from the paved road. Keep in mind, there are almost no streetlights anywhere. While driving for about 2 or 3 minutes, there had been a pickup truck in front of us, maybe 50 feet or so. Upon seeing the dirt track and our interest piqued, we stopped the car to discuss what we wanted to do. We began to slowly pull into the dirt track. Simultaneously, the pickup truck ahead of us abruptly stopped and sat in place. We noticed this, having fully pulled into the dirt at this point, and immediately stopped and stood frozen in panic. The driver of the truck quickly put his or her car in reverse. We could see the reverse lights on, and began to immediately back up towards us. I threw my car in reverse in panic and attempted to turn back the way that we had come. I was able to get turned around and back into drive fairly quickly. In reverse, the driver of the truck was accelerating very quickly towards us. I floored the gas on my Nissan Altima. The truck driver followed us for a few seconds and then he stopped. We never looked back. We never found the supposed church. But this happening scared the hell out of us, and I've never considered attempting to go back. So, I would have been 11 or 12 on my way home from school. I was on my bike, but I stopped by this table outside someone's house. It was used locally as a sort of recycling table. People would leave their old stuff there and take other people's old stuff. There would be ads for free furniture like sofas and tables that people didn't need anymore, as well the whole thing was pretty nice. So, I stopped there on my way home to see if there was any stuff that I wanted. And while I was looking through some of the boxes, this other guy walks up to the table. But instead of looking through the stuff, pulls out his phone and looks at it for a couple of minutes. I was pretty shy and awkward, so I wanted to get going as soon as he appeared, but I didn't want him to think that he was the reason that I was leaving. So, I stuck around for a couple of minutes. Just as I was about to get going, he comes over to me and asks if I have a pen that he can borrow. He was talking in broken English with a pretty strong accent. I didn't recognize the accent, but from where I lived, it wasn't out of the ordinary. He was pretty blunt and came off a bit rude about it as well. And I remember thinking it was kind of weird for him to be good with talking like that to a shy 11-year-old girl. But I put that down to him apparently being in his second language. I didn't really feel threatened by him at this point, since he was on foot and I had a bike. I really wanted to just get home, but I did have a pen and I didn't want to look rude, so I opened my bag to get one for him. My pencil case was right at the bottom of it though, so I awkwardly turned out the contents of my school bag on the pavement to get a pen. At this point, another guy on a bike comes around the corner, and I guess he saw a middle-aged man talking to a kid, with their stuff tipped everywhere, and pulled over to ask if everything was okay. He asked me if I was okay, if I knew this man, etc. Both me and the pen guy tried to tell him that it was fine, that I was just lending him a pen. The bike guy seemed suspicious and started asking the pen guy why he needed a pen bad enough to ask a schoolgirl. The pen guy carries on saying he needs a pen in broken English with the accent. Here's where it gets really creepy though. The more the bike guy talked to him, the pen guy started to get more flustered, and his accent started to disappear. And the broken English started sounding more like how someone making fun of someone with broken English might sound. It was like the only thing that he was confident with saying was, "You have a pen? I borrow pen." The bike guy tells him to finish with the pen and give it back to me. And then the pen guy got even more frustrated and asked the bike guy if he had paper that he could use. So apparently he needed a pen, but he didn't have anything to write on. The bike guy gave him some paper and carried on sticking around watching him and helped me get my stuff back into my bag. Once the pen guy had some paper, he just got out his phone and copied down a couple of phone numbers from his phone onto the paper, and then put it in his pocket, gave me my pen back, and walked off pretty quickly. The bike guy seemed just as confused as I was. I was really shy and awkward and probably didn't explain what was going on much better than the pen guy did. He asked if I was okay again, and made sure that I was on my way home. Asked if I wanted to borrow his phone to call someone. Once I had told him that it was okay, we both got on our bikes and cycled off in separate directions. And that was that. Never saw the pen guy again, although I cycled that same route home every day. Looking back, I'm so confused. I'm 99% sure the guy's accent was fake. The way he acted after the bike guy showed up was really suspicious. I can't think of any reason why he would want to write down a couple of numbers he already had in his phone onto paper. And if that was his original plan, surely he would have asked me for paper at the same time as asking for a pen. I have no idea what his plan was if the bike guy didn't show up either. He was on foot and I was on a bike. It's not like he was about to ask me to get in a car with him or something. I guess it would have been easy enough for him to grab me once I had my school bag tipped over the pavement. But again, he was on foot, so it's not like he could have pulled me into the car or something. Another one that I've thought about is maybe he would have given me some phone numbers and told me to call them, which I wouldn't have done. But then surely he would have asked for paper as well as a pen. He couldn't have been taking pictures of me for anything either. He had an old brick phone which didn't take pictures. The more I think about this, the more baffled and a little creeped out I am. Does anyone have any ideas what might have been going on? The one thing that I'm sure of is that I'm really glad that the bike guy showed up when he did. When I was 13 years old, my family was robbed by my mom's ex-best friend. Before robbing us, they had broken in multiple times. One time, they left the front door open, and another, my mother opened the laundry room door, and as she did, the back door closed. Having these experiences, we changed the locks and made sure that we locked the doors at night and armed the home alarm. The following years, the events in the story happened. For context, my family lived in a really bad area. People had been robbed and some people had been assaulted or even jumped, my brother included. My father is a truck driver, so my mother, brother, and I were usually alone there. My mom is someone who really enjoys watching the ID channel on TV. In fact, my town was once featured on one of those ID channel shows. Our town has such a high crime rate that a human trafficking ring was busted, and my mom's ex-best friend knew someone that was busted. The city that I live in is the most dangerous in the county, and just yesterday we drove past a car dump. Earlier in the year also, we've called the cops twice. Once because we heard someone in the backyard, and another because we heard gunshots. One night, my brother was asleep in the living room. I was in my room, and my mother was in her bedroom. I was on my phone at 1 a.m. because insomnia sucks. Suddenly, I heard the doorbell being rang frantically. My mom is a light sleeper, so she got up and went to the front door. She looked through the peephole of the door. I had walked out as she was standing on her tiptoes, looking at the front door. She's 5 feet tall, which roughly converted into centimeters is 152 centimeters. She was speaking to the guy behind the door. I heard a muffled guy's voice say, "My car broke down and I need to use your phone." My mother replied, "I'm sorry, I don't have a phone." She grabbed her phone after saying that. The man insisted and tried to open the door. He got angry because it was locked and he started shouting. I went to my brother and I woke him up. I told him to be quieter and we ran to the bathroom. My mom eventually joined us. We hid in the bathroom together, holding on to each other. It felt like a lifetime in that bathroom. My mother was on the phone with 911 the entire time. I was making sure my brother remained quiet. When my mom was told that the cops were there, she made sure that when she heard them knocking, that it was them. She gave her statement. I couldn't hear it all because my brother and I were in the bathroom together. My mom told us that we could get out, and I immediately called my dad in tears. He answered, and I was crying so hard that my dad couldn't understand me, so I gave the phone to my mom. A while later, the cops came back and told my mother that they got the guy that my mom had described, and he was playing on his phone and didn't have a car. His intentions were to probably break in and rob us, or worse. My mom watching the Investigation Discovery Channel saved our lives. So, to the man who tried to break into our house, let's not meet. This happened 2 nights ago and I'm not over it. I was working in my bedroom, which is where my desktop is set up, and it was about 12:45 a.m. when I decided to wind down for the night. My husband had gone to bed around 9 p.m., but selflessly offered to take up the guest room so I didn't have to stop working. He's awesome. Typically when this happens, my husband takes our dog with him. So imagine my surprise when I turned the lights off and saw my pup crawl out from the other side of the bed, give a big stretch and come up with me. It was 1 a.m. on the dot. I turned on the patio light and I let the dog out to go to the bathroom. She's older and tends to wake up in the middle of the night to go. I thought that I would prevent that from happening. I watched through the blinds as my dog stared out of my sightline and began to wag her tail profusely. She crept just out of view, her eyes very focused. I got a gross sense of dread and began to panic. I threw the door open and called for her, and that's when I heard him. I don't know what he said, I was too petrified to listen, really. She didn't come at first, just kind of looked at me and back at the person on my porch, who I couldn't see. I noticed then that there were pillows and a blanket stacked on top of my grill that for sure weren't mine. I screamed my dog's name and she came back in. I ran to the other side of the house and woke up to my husband, shouting there was someone on our porch. He got up in disbelief and wandered to the patio entrance from the kitchen and opened the door. There, a young man about 20 or so sat on the ground against our house. He was barefoot and on the same wall that the bedroom entrance to the patio was on, which is why I couldn't see him unless I had stepped out. My husband asked if he was alright, but I couldn't hear his response. Husband told him that he was at the wrong house and that he needed to leave. We went to our safe and grabbed our handgun, trying to talk through the insanity in our nerves. We don't live in a crime-heavy city. We've never heard of anything happening in our neighborhood, and nothing like this had ever happened to us before. But there we were at 1 a.m., with a stranger on our patio, who had been there for God only knew how long, in the dark. When we walked back out to the living room, we saw that he had moved to a chair on our patio. My husband shined the light on the handgun at him and shouted for him to leave. I called the police. When they arrived, the man was gone, but his pillows and blanket were still there. One of the officers told us that he believed he knew who this young man was. He had a psychotic episode earlier in the week after coming off of his bipolar meds. He lived nearby and was probably headed back that way. And we're no strangers to mental illness, so naturally I felt awful that we had left to calling the police and brandishing a weapon. But at the same time, what were you doing in my yard? So, a young man who opened my gate closed my gate behind him and sat on my patio at 1 a.m. I still have your pillows. They're on my back porch where you left them. Come back and grab them, but not when I'm home. So I'm a 20-year-old female living in a shady apartment complex in an otherwise rich suburban area for 3 years. And I have lots of stories that could fit on here. but this one is about a neighbor that I'll call Bob. A little backstory. I was 18 at the time, and my then 16-year-old sister used to babysit all the neighborhood kids. These kids considered us their friends and it got to where they seemed to have a radar of when me and my sister went outside. They would come out and talk to us, and we would let them ride our skateboards and such in the parking lot. The kids were ages 8 to 13. So, one day we were outside with them and we were joined by a stranger. He stood between us and our car, towering over us. He introduced himself and asked us to sign a petition that he made up. We did, just to be friendly, and then he asked us how old we were. I thought maybe he was a fellow teenager that looked older, that he was just awkward. So, I told him that I was 18. And the very next question was if I wanted to go out with him. In front of my mom and the other kid's mom. I awkwardly declined, but he continued talking about how he thought me and my sister were in middle school. Also, he was 28. Eventually, he wandered away and he asked somebody else to sign his petition. A few days later, he knocked at her door after asking my neighbor for the address. He had a bag of what he said was chicken and wanted us to go eat it with him at the park. We declined because we both had schoolwork to do. He walked away, and he was mumbling about how antisocial everyone was. Later, we look out of our window and see him playing baseball with 2 girls. He kept physically moving their arms to different positions, even though they shrugged away from him. The next day, one of the kids runs up to me. I'll call her Maddie. She's 8. She got a new pair of Heelys and wanted help with them. I was holding her hand and guiding her along when Bob appears and says that he can help better. Maddie says no, but he insists. He pushed me aside and he reaches for Maddie, holding her tightly around the upper chest area. Her grandma was there too and flips out. He wanders away. The next day, Maddie is freaking out, saying Bob was just sitting on her porch when she left for school that morning. Her parents found out, and as they walked outside, he let himself in. And they said that he went into their kitchen to make orange chicken. We later found out another neighbor had a similar story. Another time, we were helping a family move. They have a 2-year-old son. The garages are in a triangle shape to the road, almost a roundabout. There's a flat patch of grass behind them. Well, here comes Bob to help us. He criticized the way that we pack things and didn't help until our neighbor politely asked him to leave. Well, he left the garage, but instead of leaving, he asked the 2-year-old if he wanted to play. The kid says no, and it made him mad. He picked up the kid to play and the kid slapped him. He asked the kid if he wanted to go behind the garages to play ball. The kid's mom doesn't notice, so I go with him and I guide the kid to his mom. The climax of this story is when me and my sister went on a walk with our 17-year-old friend and her other friend. Maddie found us and wanted to come along. So, we're starting out when Bob comes out. He sees our friend and he asked how old she is and how much she weighs because she's so skinny. He asked where we're going. My friend tells him that we're going for ice cream on a girls' trip. We didn't ask her to say that. He's like, "Oh man," and he stomps away. We continue our walk, but halfway through we have a weird feeling. I look behind us and Bob is running towards us. He yells at us for hiding from him, while also telling Maddie how pretty she is. An older neighbor sees this and asks him what's going on. He tells the man that we're being mean and he needs to go write a song about us. He leaves, but we see him sitting at the park. Well, he saw us and again comes running. We stop and he asks which one of us is over 18. Maddie's dad is here at this point and tells him that we aren't interested in him. He explodes, telling her dad to screw himself, and he's so rude and he calls me names. Maddie's crying and the neighbor who saw us before came to check on us, since he saw Bob running. Bob goes inside, muttering to himself. For weeks we don't see him. A single dad and his 5-year-old daughter move in, and we are introducing ourselves to them. My mom kind of tips him off that there's someone in the building who's a little off, especially around Maddie. The dad says that he's seen someone like that giving kids candy at the pool when the kids looked uncomfortable. Well, here comes Bob, as if on cue. He immediately tells the girl in front of her dad that she looks like a movie star and that she's so pretty. He asks to play with her, but the dad says no when they go inside. Turns out they're next door neighbors. We still didn't see him much, but other neighbors were telling us stories about him. There was a woman who's alone most of the day with her 2 kids under 5, who told us that he watches her when she goes to and from her car. Also, Maddie's parents continue to see him watching her. And then one day we're again babysitting, and here he comes. Only this time he's swinging nunchucks. Maddie screams and hides in her car. Bob strolls over with his nunchucks and starts talking to all of us casual. And then his head cranes to look into the car, and he says, "Where's Maddie?" We had told him that she wasn't there, and he walked away. By then, most of the kids were afraid to go outside when they saw him. He had a habit of wandering around the complex. We could tell by his height and lanky gait. A few times we had seen Bob with his dad. Those times, neither even glanced at us. Then one day, he just stopped showing up. We had seen his dad and brother come in and out all the time, but never him. We only saw him again a year later, and it was only for one day near Christmas, and then he disappeared again. So, I don't know what happened to him. But it was just one of our weird experiences with neighbors in the 3 years living there. For the next 2 stories, I'll post other occurrences that happened in the same apartment complex. So, this happened almost a year ago now, when I still lived in my apartment complex, which was in a nice area but seemed to attract the weirdest people. Just a little backstory. There is a neighbor in the building across from mine, an older single woman named Susan. When me and my sister first moved in, we would hang out near her building with a former friend. She's worthy of her own story, to be honest, and so we developed a rapport with Susan. We would bring her tea when she was sick and we would walk her dog. I was next door neighbors with a different woman called Laura. Laura is a mother of 2 young kids, and she and her boyfriend like to sit on their balcony overlooking the parking lot and smoke into the late hours of the night. Well, one day Laura was doing this at around 2 a.m. Laura texts my mom that there's been an incident. My mom tells me and my sister, and we tend to stay up pretty late, and we went to her balcony to see what was up. In the parking lot, we see a car that's halfway backed into another, a parked car, but almost at a side angle. Laura says the person who was in the car ran away as soon as they hit the other car. The car, however, remained, still running too. So, we're wondering what the heck that was all about. My mom goes downstairs to the car to check for damage, when she sees a figure standing at Susan's building. It was a man that we had never seen before, and he was just standing there. Turns out, the owner of the sideways car freaked out because he saw us looking, and claims literally, someone stole it and moved it out of the way so they could have my parking spot. The next morning, my mom texts Susan about the incident, as the sideways car was kind of blocking hers. She says that she knows what happened and has us come outside so she could tell us. She's standing with the man from the parking lot the night before. He introduces himself as Eric, and then he's seeing Susan. When we start talking, it turns out he didn't actually know what had happened. He only saw someone running from the car, but that story's irrelevant now. Anyway, we get to talking, and apparently Susan had told him about our family and that I'm studying to be a therapist. I confirm it and he just lights up. He goes on and on about all the similar work that he's done, and thanks me for my service. He starts giving me names of places that I can go for shadowing hours and resources for getting a job. Finally, he tells me to use his name when applying for jobs in the future, and he could give me a job at the psych center he apparently helped found, which I looked up and could not cooperate. He was very insistent that I use his name. And next, he talks to my sister. Susan had told him that she likes movies, so he told her that he had a small speaking role in one of those teen book-to-film adaptations that we used to obsess over. So, of course, when we go home we look up his name that he gave me along with the movie title. Nowhere is he pictured in the film or given any sort of credit for it. So we dropped the movie title and just looked up his name. It wasn't a movie that we found. Nope. Apparently he had been infamous in our town for years as someone known as the Child Biter. He had earned the name by biting an 8-year-old girl who was playing with his daughter. A few years later, he bites another girl and apparently stalked her family in a public parking lot after. Another few years pass and he has a third victim. We're freaking out and text Laura, who's kind of our gossip buddy. She has 2 young kids, so she's furious that this guy with actual criminal records was allowed to move in, though he wasn't put on the lease. We were concerned too because a lot of kids lived in ours and Susan's building. The question came up of whether to tell Susan. We debated, but decided it was the best thing. My mom sent Susan a long text about how we discovered what he did. 5 minutes later, she calls us. She tells us not to believe the news articles, and the court records, and the fact that he pled guilty because he was politically framed by one of the girl's fathers who was running for some small office or something. My mom covers for me and my sister by saying that we looked up his name and the movie in front of Laura. Susan demands to know why Laura's concerned. My mom tells her to talk to Laura herself, so she does. She knocks on Laura's door and asks what her concerns are. Laura barely gets one sentence out about how there are kids everywhere, and that she's trying to be a good parent before Susan turns around and just leaves, just like that. There are a few families whose kids I babysit who pretty much let their kids wander the complex all day, with no supervision. Unless I'm outside, then it's free babysitting apparently. We tell some of them, and they are enraged. For 2 days, there's not a single kid outside. After that, I guess the parents decided actually looking after their kids was too much work, and gradually let them play outside again alone. A few days later, an 8-year-old girl that we babysit, Maddie. This poor girl has the worst history of both getting the attention of creepy men. I think they pick up on her crappy home life. And her friend ran up to us to tell us about a nice guy at the pool who gave them M&Ms. A few minutes later, Eric strolls up with his bathing suit and Maddie tells us it was him. We avoid eye contact, but he slows when he passes us. We warn Maddie and her friend in 8-year-old terms to stay away from him. Another time, we're visiting a friend who lives in his building. He emerges right as we enter the hallway. He puts on a huge grin and starts making small talk. We awkwardly excuse ourselves and go to the friend's house. We go inside and our friend keeps looking out the window. There's Eric standing by his car just staring through the window. Part of our babysitting includes picking Maddie up from the bus randomly in the week when asked. The bus stop is right next to the pool. And who do we see in a lounge chair with sunglasses not doing a thing every single day at bus time? Eric. Now we're all kind of upset with this dude. We contact the property manager who says she can't do anything because he's not registered as living there. If he stays longer than 2 weeks though, he'll be charged for not being on it. Well, the 2 weeks ended, and then we never saw him again. I'm still stumped as to why the heck he told me to use his name as a reference, when a simple search of his name shows all of his history. Again, I lived in a nice area in a small suburban town. No idea what it was about those apartments that attracted the weirdos and criminals. Maybe it's some unspoken agreement for them to all gather there that we didn't know about. For the next story, I'll post the one of our friend that claimed she was a witch and tried to murder her parents. But until then, creepy man who bites children, let's not meet again. These events happened over several months in 2016. When me and my sister, then 16 and 14, first moved into our most recent apartment complex with our mother. We now call it the apartment complex from hell because there were many incidents like this. Admittedly, we were still into the hoverboard craze then and would ride them around. This is how we met Savannah. She was our age and lived in our building. She asked to hang out and we were happy to hopefully make new friends, so we said yes. We hung outside the complex at a little park area. It got dark and we started to make up ghost stories. It turns out, she liked the creepy paranormal stuff like we did. As we were walking home, the light in one of the apartment hallways flickered, and I joked and said that it was a spirit trying to communicate with us. Savannah made up a flash once for yes, twice for no system to communicate with the spirit, and we messed around a bit. We thought it was just harmless fun. The next day, she runs over to us excited. She informs us that the spirit we had met last night told her its name was Kieran and that it meant light, so it made all perfect sense now. We asked her how she knew and she said she went back later that night alone to talk to it. This was the first time it occurred to us that she might have really believed in this kind of stuff. Our aunt had given us an old Ouija board as a joke the year before, and we thought Savannah might like it. Savannah lit up and said that she wanted to try and talk to Kieran. So we huddled in the hallway connecting the apartments and put our hands on the board. We kept getting random letters that didn't make sense, but soon Savannah's questions were directed to Kieran. We felt her moving the planchette and called her out, but she got mad and said that she would prove it. She took her hand off the planchette and it no longer moved. She just huffed and insisted that it wasn't her. Over the next few weeks, we did mostly normal stuff with her, but she kept talking about the ghosts and Ouija boards until we broke down and we played it again. This time, we were introduced to a new ghost, Evan. We knew it was Savannah moving the planchette, but we were curious about the story that she was making, so we let her follow through. Evan was a ghost, or a demon rather, about our age who wanted freedom from a greater demon controlling him. The greater demon's name? Kieran. Savannah's parents called her inside and conveniently, Evan had to go too. He told us that he would protect us against Kieran, especially Savannah. Savannah commented on how cute that was for him to offer. A few days go by normally, but then Savannah's back to tell us that she has a boyfriend. We're happy for her until she tells us that his name is Evan. We're wondering what the heck she's talking about, and she explains that while sleeping over at another friend's house, something had tugged off her shirts while she had slept. She had woken up and heard Evan's voice, and that he had visited her in the dreams and asked to date her or something like that. She had said yes. Of course, we know she made up Evan, so we were kind of like, what is wrong with you? And we don't want to talk about this demon stuff anymore. Now Savannah was extremely possessive over her friends. When she would see us with someone else, she would text us nonstop about why we hadn't invited her. We tried to keep our distance, but she lived on the ground floor and literally watched out her window waiting for us to come outside. She would latch onto us. We didn't know much about her home life, but she always seemed troubled. She had scars on her wrists and talked about running away from home. Her parents seemed alright, if rather strict and religious. We still hung out with her because we were worried, but were starting to feel weird about it. Worse, she would randomly show up holding her hand out, saying Evan was holding her hand. She would look at random things and laugh when no one was talking because Evan had told her a joke. Once, she made us feel her cheek where it was supposedly warm from Evan kissing her. It wasn't warm. One day my sister and I were bored from her talking to Evan on the Ouija board. She was still controlling the whole thing and wanted some fun. I texted my mom to call my phone from a blocked number and play creepy sounds. Looking back, this was one of the dumbest things that I did, but at the time, it was just for fun. My mom made the call and I put it on speaker. Savannah is living for it, especially when my mom played a track from a scary movie about a ghost. My mom took it a step further and threw a banana off our third-story balcony for us to see. Savannah said it was a sign that Kieran was winning. We had no idea of the fire this would light in her. We were about to tell her that it was a prank, but again, her mom called her inside. She found us again the next day and I came clean about the prank. She laughed and said that there is no way that we could have done that. I said no, my mom literally did all of it. Well, Savannah had told her friend about it, who had told her that yellow objects, like the banana, were a sign of the devil and seeing them meant the devil was hunting you. This was all she talked about for a while, but since nothing else happened, she gradually forgot. Things went back to normal for a while, until Autumn moved in. Autumn and Savannah connected instantly because of their history with depression. Autumn was a few years younger than us, but had a heck of a lot more of a past. This included significant time spent in psychiatric facilities and violence towards her classmates and family. Autumn claimed that she heard demons talk to her at night, and just like that, the ghost stuff had started again. Savannah felt threatened by Autumn and felt the need to one-up her with ghost stuff. She told her Evan was her ghost brother that looked out for her. I was like, hold on, you claim that he was your boyfriend. She giggled and said, that's gross, he's my brother. Her story had completely switched. Now she was dating another demon named Jacob, and they were engaged. She even showed us a ring to prove it. The next week or so was literally like a match between them to see who was the darkest and most involved in the spiritual world or whatever. They would compare scars on their wrists and brag about cutting themselves and doing things like sneaking out in the night. In a move to one-up Autumn, Savannah drew a giant pentagram in the parking lot with chalk. Her parents found out and she backed out and blamed it on Autumn. The next freaking day, people come to repave the parking lot. The pentagram is now buried under it forever, literally. Savannah moved on to saying her friend had found Jacob's body and was going to put his spirit back inside it. Savannah continued to take advice from this friend, who fueled everything she did. Savannah now said the friend was teaching her witchcraft. We mostly avoided her at this point, but she would ask us to do things like make holy water with her and try and summon her a familiar. From that point, she insisted she was a fire witch and walked around wearing all black with Halloween-like makeup on her face. She and Autumn frequently snuck out together, and occasionally we'd see cop cars at her house. My sister and I were avoiding them both, but now we'd get fiery texts from both of them if we hung out with other people, especially our guy friends. Once, they saw us get home and stood in the parking lot pretending to be possessed. Autumn also cut all of her hair and claimed to have tried to kill her teacher. My sister and I knew that was bullcrap, or at least we hoped. But Savannah took it so seriously. She would go around telling neighbors of terrible crimes she committed or wanted to commit. She even told us that when she had first seen us outside with hoverboards, that she had wished for them to blow up. One day, we again saw the police come to her door, and the officers had jackets that said they were from the Juvenile Justice Department. Her mom pulled me, my sister, and our mom aside to explain what was going on. Apparently, 2 years before, they had discovered Savannah talking with a man online. Her messages to him were hiring him to come literally kill her parents, after making threats of killing them a few days before. We were able to confirm the story after pet sitting for them and finding court papers about it. We had known she was on probation, but she would always tell us different stories as to why. Savannah continued to beg us to hang out with her after that, even inviting herself to spend the night. We avoided her at all costs, but she would follow us everywhere. It kind of died down when Autumn moved out, and Savannah moved in with her family shortly after. Since then, she started doing service hours at a horse stables and graduated high school. I really hope she's gotten happier and more stable. Autumn messaged my sister a few months ago, asking to call her mom to confirm that she was with us. She wasn't. And we later saw her with a 19-year-old dude. She's 14. Me and my sister and my mom have moved as well. There were too many incidents in those apartments. Our new place is so quiet and peaceful. But to Savannah and Autumn, let's never meet again. This happened in a beach in the Philippines about 2 years ago. Me and my friends decided to take a quick vacation to let off some steam from work. On our first night, we decided to just drink outside our hotel room. We got a little tipsy and one of my friends decided to take a walk on the beach and try to meet some other tourists there. I had a bad feeling about what might happen to him since he was already drunk, so I decided to join him together with another friend. He said he wanted to visit the rock formations, which is a known hookup spot since the place was dark and there were no other establishments on that part of the shoreline. It stretches to about half the length of a football court with pure darkness. I was reluctant about the idea of him going in there, but he was adamant. So I agreed as long as he comes back after a few minutes. Me and my other friend waited on the last bar on the end of the shoreline, before the dark area starts. Me and my friend were talking about something when we heard a gut-wrenching scream. It sounded like our friend, so we decided to rush in. The only light at that time was coming from the moon, so my friend decided to pull out his phone and turn on the flashlight. We asked around and saw some people hooking up on the sand. We asked if they saw our friend, giving them descriptions on what he might look like, but they said that they never saw him. Our hearts were pounding at this point because we don't know what might have happened to him. We ran until we reached the end of it. There is a huge rock on the shore about 15 feet tall, with a local guy standing on top of it. We asked him, "Have you seen our friend?" He was about my height, wearing a black shirt. He said, "Was he gay?" I didn't see the relevance in the question, but I said yes. He might have went over there in the mangroves, and then pointed to a darker part of the beach filled with mangroves. Using only the light on the phone, we tried searching the small area. It looked like a tiny shelter with the overgrown plants acting as the roof. When we turned back, the guy on the top of the rock is already walking towards us. And then two more guys popped up behind him, probably hiding behind the huge rock. "He wasn't there," I said. Then the guy who was on the rock did a karate chop on my friend's arm for him to let go of his phone, which was successful, as the phone rolled in the sand. My friend was able to grab the phone, and that's when he shouted, "Run." I was confused with what had just happened, that I just started running after he said run, without actually knowing what we were running for. And that's when it hit me that this was an ambush, that we were led into the mangroves for them to steal my friend's phone. I was running for a few seconds when I started feeling the weight on my feet. The sandals that I was wearing got really heavy because I wasn't aware that I had been running on wet sand. My friend took off his flip-flops for him to run faster. I wanted to do the same, but then I realized that my sandals were strap-on, so I just continued running. I could hear the guys chasing us saying, "Stop, we were just joking." I didn't want to fall for what they said, so I continued running, my legs starting to feel numb since I'm not really an athletic person. There came a point where I just wanted to stop since I don't have anything valuable with me. But then I thought that it could be a reason for them to harm me, so I ran with all my might until we reached the first bar. My friend was already there catching his breath when we saw the friend we were looking for, laughing and talking to the locals. We wanted to punch him for what he had just put us through, but he had no idea what just happened to us, so we let it go. Our vacation still went through, and we still go to that island from time to time, but we vowed to never go on that side of the beach ever again. Now, that part of the beach has already been closed to tourists, so to those guys who tried to mug us on the beach, please, let's not meet. This happened years ago when I was maybe 17. I'm 23 now. My family was on vacation. We were staying at a resort in South Carolina on the beach. The resort had two buildings, one directly by the beach and one that was across the street. We were staying in the building across the street. My cousin, my sister, and myself decided to go and sit on the beach one night. It was probably about 9 p.m. There were usually a few people out walking or playing around. On this night, there wasn't anyone out there except a few couples walking by randomly. We sat down on some tiles and watched the water from a good distance. We were chatting and telling stories. We noticed a man walking around us. Going to the water, back to the walkway leading up to the resort, back and forth. He got closer and closer to us until he was walking so close that he stepped on the edge of our towels. He was a big man with shaggy blonde hair. My sister suggested that we go down to the water. He followed us. At this point, we knew that he was following us, so we decided to leave. We started up the wooden walkway back to our building. Like I said, our building was across the street. To get to it, you had to pass through a little alleyway. The alley was well lit and the street was relatively busy, but there is a parking garage adjacent to the alleyway. My head immediately told me not to walk past that parking garage. We were facing the alleyway, about to walk through. This guy is right behind us. I loudly said, "Hey, wait, let me beat off my sandals." We stopped and took our shoes and beat the sand out of them. The man passed us reluctantly, so close that he was almost touching us. I saw his eyes for the first time. He was definitely on something. His pupils looked messed up. His eyes were wide as saucers. He passed by us slowly and went where? Directly into the parking garage. I knew he was waiting for us. I said, "Run." We ran back over the wooden walkway and onto the beach. Through the sand to the next walkway, which led up to another building's pool area. He was behind us again, chasing us, running full force. We got into the pool area and the man stopped. There was a woman cleaning and we told her what had happened. She got hotel security and a police officer asked us some questions and walked us back to our building. I was scarred by this experience for a while, and I will not go to the beach at night ever again without my very large and tough fiancé by my side ever again. So creepy beach chaser, let's not meet again. Okay, so I live in rural Ireland and the place I like to walk is a peninsula. So like a finger sticking out into the sea but wide. Its beach runs up both sides and is very isolated, so sometimes I see seals up the fop. Anyway, this happened to me yesterday. I'm a 29-year-old female and I was walking at the beach at the peninsula. I would go up one side and then back down the other. Anyway, as I'm walking up, I'm about a mile from the top. I note a man runs up behind me and up around the corner at the top and then back by me. I think, okay, cool, he's doing laps. But then when I get around the corner, like at the very end of the peninsula, he runs back up from behind me, but very close, like it's really wide there, and I could have reached out and touched him. Now that frightened me because it's a huge beach at the end, and I had headphones on, so it kind of startled me. But anyways, he keeps going on ahead of me, and I turn back facing the way that I came, and stand for a few minutes because that's where I see the seals usually. I turn around to keep going and I see the man standing on the dune facing me. He's climbed up on it, and he's a good bit ahead of me, and I think he's just looking at the ocean like me. But still, I feel like he's looking at me while I have my back to him, and I see him moving up onto the dune further. I try not to look at him, but I have sunglasses on and I keep him in my peripheral. And I see him crouched down and hide, right where I would have to climb and walk past to get over to the other side of the peninsula. The only reason that I could see him was because he had a high visibility vest on, and I could see some of it through the grass. I stop and I'm looking, and then after a minute or so, I see him stand up on the dune and just face me. He's wearing a runner's bandana and sunglasses, so I can't see exactly what he's looking at, but I'm stopped on the beach. He's standing on the dune and looking my way, and then he takes 2 steps like he's coming back my way. And I just ran back the way that I came. I had met my family walking the dog about 2 miles back, and I ran until I could see them. I was terrified, and I don't know why, but when I caught him crouching, I had like a primal fear, like it wasn't going to be good at all. And the really strange thing is, I never saw him come back down the beach, even though he was coming down the dune towards me, and there was no one around. So from around March 15th when the quarantine started, all the way up until the beginning of June, I didn't see my friends at all. Obviously, I could still talk to them online and stuff, but that got a bit old as time went on. So to keep myself from imploding in boredom, I decided to pick up a hobby I've been wanting to try for a while: urban photography. And not to seem entitled or whatever, but a lot of kids I go to school with really seem to like my photos. Being the only recognition that I'd ever got from people outside my circle of friends, you could see why I would want to continue this hobby. Each day after I finished my online schoolwork, I would hop on my bike and ride around the old, forgotten places of my town. There were no shortages of these, as the expansion of my town pretty much stopped in the 1990s. Now, as you would expect, many of these places are infamous amongst the teenagers, some of which being an abandoned hospital and an old mill in particular. But one such place that gets less recognition from youngsters is an old forgotten campground used primarily for Boy Scouts in the early 1940s. One day in mid-April, I decided to head down there and check the place out. The whole camp rests on a hill. At the base of the hill is a relatively popular town beach that features a very pleasant pond. But on the top of the hill is where the abandoned camp is, and that's where I was going to go. I pulled up to an old cabin and began taking pictures. Everything seemed pretty normal at first. I'd been coming here since I was about 7, so I knew the layout relatively well. Eventually, I made my way over to a multi-level brick building overflowing with moss. I later learned that this was apparently the old firehouse from back when the camp was in use. I snapped some cool pictures that I actually really liked, as I've always been fascinated with abandoned buildings. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed something on the ground, a new clean toothbrush. Thinking it was odd, I took a picture of it. Almost instantaneously, I heard what sounded like a short, low hum coming from the back of the firehouse. Kind of like when you try to give a quick sympathy laugh for an unfunny joke. With that, it was almost as if any thought of leaving had been put on pause in my mind. I crept quietly around to the back of the firehouse. To my intrigue, there was a great hole where I assumed a door frame used to be. I suddenly got a really uneasy feeling looking at this door. It didn't really feel like I was being watched. Quite the opposite, actually. I felt like I was seeing something that I shouldn't. I peered my head inside, and what I saw made me drop my phone. Inside, there had to be 25 middle-aged men, all skinny, shirtless, and with shaved heads. They were all laying on the floor, whispering quietly to each other. Almost all at the same time they stopped. The only one sitting up had raised a skinny finger to point at me. "You look good, kid," he said in a voice that made me think that he was the one who had made the noise earlier. "You look like you could be a star in Hollywood." He then threw something at me, a small black trash bag containing something I really didn't want to find out. I bent down quick and grabbed my phone and booked it out of there, leaving my bike at the firehouse. As the beach at the bottom of the hill wasn't open for the season yet, the camp was empty. I didn't encounter another person until I got almost half a mile away from that damn firehouse. Of course, the next day, I had to get my bike. I didn't want to tell my parents about the incident, so I had to make up some quick BS excuse as to why I was walking all the way back there. I was terrified to go anywhere near there again, but I had to get my bike back. Once I got there, I didn't hear anything from the men in the house. I anxiously crept back towards that door, and of course, nobody was there. I snapped a picture of the doorway, and I rode off on my bike. I don't know where those men are now, but I just hope that I don't ever bump into them again. This happened a few years ago, right before I deployed to the Middle East. I'm in the National Guard, so before we deployed, we had a train up at Fort Hood, Texas. After our training was finished, we got a 4-day pass. I was single, no kids, so I decided instead of going home, I would travel around Texas. After a few days in Austin, I wanted to see the Gulf, so I traveled to Rockport, Texas. I parked my rental about a 10-minute walk away from the beach since it was a nice day, and I don't mind walking. It was pretty quiet as it was about 9 a.m., but there was still quite a few people there. I was laying out and reading my Kindle when a heavily tattooed young guy walks up to where I was laying out, and he asked if he could leave his clothes near me while he takes a dip. I say sure. He goes in the ocean and I don't really think much of it. He comes out of the water about 10 minutes later and proceeds to lay down next to me and starts chatting. I kind of wanted to be left alone, but he seemed harmless, and I didn't want to be rude, so I talked with him for a bit. His name is Angel, and he said he lived about 30 minutes away. He tells me that he would have joined the military, but he spent time in prison. I don't ask for what. He tells me it was for some mix-up. This mix-up landed him 8 years. I try and direct the conversation to more harmless things, but he doesn't act like a lonely stranger, even a guy trying to hit on a girl. He's completely uninterested in anything except why I'm here and who I'm with. And then he starts getting really creepy. He keeps repeating back to me that, "You're really all alone. You came here by yourself. You're not with anyone." Alarm bells are ringing. I didn't actually phrase any of it quite like that, but he read between the lines. Note to future self, always pretend to be waiting for friends. I start stressing that I'm leaving that day. I wasn't. And that I'm in the military and have to be back soon or they'll consider me AWOL and start looking for me. True, but not for another 2 days when my pass is up. He pretty much ignores all of this, and I notice that we are both watching people walk by us carefully, if that makes sense. Luckily for me, it was getting more crowded and families were walking by us in pretty steady intervals. He starts asking me what kind of car that I drive, what hotel I'm staying in. He asks me where I parked. I tell him a rental, I'm leaving, and I don't remember where I parked. I've been creeped out for a while now and I've been in some dangerous situations before, but I've never been more frightened than in broad daylight, surrounded by people talking with this creep. He then starts telling me about this party in this town later tonight and that I should come. I could meet all of his friends. He offers to drive me. Again, I bring up that I'm leaving, I'm in the military and all that jazz. He continues to be amazed that I'm here all by myself. He also tells me that he's parked right behind us, and that I want to see his car. No, I do not. I tell him that I'm comfortable where I'm at. He had also put on his cargo shorts that he took off for his ocean dip, and kept rubbing one of his pockets while he talked to me. There was definitely something in there. I doubt it was a gun, but this guy was scaring the hell out of me, and it made me wonder if he had a knife or something. Now I know it seems strange that I didn't just get up and leave, but this guy was making every hair in the back of my neck stand up, and I wanted to extract myself without pissing him off. Then after mentioning the party again, he says something even creepier. He looks at my legs and says, "I bet you can run for days." What the hell? There was zero context for this statement. We weren't even talking about working out, athletics, or the Olympics, fitness routines, or even military training. None of those topics came up ever the whole time that he was creeping me out. I look over and a family is walking by us fairly close, so I leapt up and I started gathering my stuff, telling him that I gotta go to the restroom and that I'll see him later. I power walk down to the water and walk along the beach in the opposite direction of my car, toward the pier where there are restrooms and snacks. He followed me the entire way while talking on his cell phone. I was walking on the beach while he was walking along the edge of the parking lot that ran parallel. Once I had reached the pier, I doubled back to where my car was actually parked. I watched him until he finally stopped following me. There is a small booth that the parking lot attendant sat in. I parked in the free lot behind her, but I stopped and told her the situation, described the car that I was getting into, which she could see from her booth. She agreed to make sure that I got in my car safely. A little paranoid since I was fairly certain that he had stopped following me, but just in case. I'm just glad the beach was fairly crowded.